The year is 50 AD, and we find ourselves in the thriving metropolis of Corinth. A Jewish husband and wife, recently forced out of Rome, are quietly running their tent-making business when an unfamiliar face enters, seeking employment. They had no idea this moment would forever alter the trajectory of Christianity. The stranger was none other than the Apostle Paul, and the married couple, Priscilla and Aquila, names that would come to represent bravery, insight, and steadfast devotion. But here's something most don't realize. This wasn't some random encounter. This marked the start of one of the most significant collaborations in Scripture, one that would take them throughout the Roman Empire, building congregations, and even instructing one of the most gifted speakers of their era. So, if this is your first time here, before we continue, think about tapping that like button and subscribing if you're not already part of our community. Also, drop a comment telling us your location and what time you're tuning in. We really want to hear from you. Now then, without any more delay, let's get started, shall we? The dirt-covered roads of Corinth extend endlessly beneath the Mediterranean heat. A solitary traveler makes his way through the merchant district, his sandals nearly worn through, his robe marked by the journey. This is Paul from Tarsus, the individual destined to transform civilization. Yet at this moment, he appears no different from any other displaced person looking for refuge in an unknown city. His gaze sweeps across the cramped streets filled with shops and vendor stalls. The scent of hide and fabric permeates the atmosphere. Within this labyrinth of trade, he looks for recognizable faces, for individuals who understand his craft and possibly his beliefs. The burden of his calling weighs heavily upon him. He's been forced out of one city after another, his teachings met with violence and hostility. Then his eyes fall upon them. A husband and wife laboring together at a substantial wooden workbench, their movements showing the confidence of long practice as they handle stretched material. The husband's facial hair is carefully groomed, his actions measured and confident. The woman working alongside him manages the weighty fabrics with unexpected capability, her sharp mind apparent in how she inspects every stitch, every fold. This is Priscilla and Aquila, though Paul hasn't learned their identities yet. What catches his attention is something more valuable than precious metal in his present circumstances. Fellow workers in tent making, individuals who comprehend the pattern of his profession. Beyond that, there's something about their demeanor, a calm self-respect that hints at greater depth. The married couple becomes aware of the approaching stranger. Aquila glances up first, his work-hardened hands pausing their task. Priscilla shifts her attention, his direction, her observant eyes taking in the newcomer's clear distress. Without exchanging words, they appear to arrive at an identical decision. This individual requires assistance. Paul has no way of knowing in this instant that he stands in the presence of two of the most consequential figures in the emerging church. These makers of tents will become his closest companions, his defenders, his teaching partners. They will put their own lives at risk for his sake, welcome him into their residences, and contribute to shaping Christianity's trajectory. The afternoon light creates extended shadows throughout the work area. In the background, the noises of the busy harbor city maintain their continuous rhythm. Vessels creak at the docks, traders announce their merchandise, young ones race through the pathways. Yet here, in this modest space containing the implements of an age-old trade, the course of history is about to shift. Priscilla puts aside her sewing implements. Aquila cleans his hands on his work apron. They have no awareness that this instant will resonate across the centuries, that their straightforward act of welcoming will establish the groundwork for congregations throughout the Roman Empire. They understand only that a fellow artisan stands in front of them and he requires their assistance. This is the true beginning of our account. Not with magnificent declarations or spectacular visions, but through the understated generosity of two individuals who decided to welcome a stranger into their lives. In the months and years ahead, that doorway will transform into an entrance for the gospel message, a gathering space for followers, a place of safety for those pursuing truth. The soft sound of fabric being manipulated fills the space. Paul takes a hesitant step closer. Priscilla and Aquila stand to greet him. Three existences are about to become interwoven in ways that will transform the ancient civilization, one meticulous stitch at a time. Setting the scene and historical background, the Roman Empire during the 1st century reached from Britain to the borders of Persia. An immense system of roads, metropolitan areas, and societies held together through military strength and governmental excellence. At its center was Rome itself, a metropolis of 1 million inhabitants, where structures of marble created shadows across packed apartment buildings, where political leaders discussed the destiny of nations, while enslaved people transported water up countless staircases. This was an era of transformation. The ancient deities appeared exhausted. Their temples were preserved more through custom than sincere faith. Religions from the East traveled westward following the commercial paths, introducing fresh concepts about mortality, rebirth, and deliverance. Secret religious groups offered hidden knowledge. Thinkers presented competing understandings of the virtuous existence. Into this spiritual bazaar arrived something completely unprecedented: the teaching of a Jewish carpenter from Nazareth who declared himself to be God's son. The early movement of Christians expanded like leavening agent in dough, permeating the empire's cities in manners that astonished even its own members. It discovered its strongest foundation not in the magnificent centers of authority, but in the workspaces and trading areas where common individuals conducted their everyday existence. Makers of tents, workers in silver, merchants of purple dye, domestic workers. These became the foundation of the emerging faith. However, this expansion brought dangers. Rome accepted numerous religions, yet it required absolute allegiance to the emperor and the government. Any movement that appeared to challenge this arrangement encountered rapid retribution. The Christians, with their discussion of a superior king and a kingdom beyond this world, walked a precarious line between acceptance and oppression. Jewish populations across the empire confronted their own distinctive difficulties. They possessed certain advantages: the permission to follow their ancient beliefs, freedom from emperor veneration, self-direction in numerous areas. Still, they remained outsiders, frequently resented by their neighbors, perpetually susceptible to the shifting attitudes of imperial authority. In the year 49 AD, Emperor Claudius released a proclamation that would alter innumerable existences. Every Jew was to depart Rome without delay. The motivations remain uncertain to scholars. Possibly disturbances in the Jewish district, possibly concerns about political unrest, possibly straightforward administrative expediency. The outcome was swift and catastrophic. Thousands of individuals were compelled to leave behind their residences, their enterprises, their complete way of existence. Among these displaced persons were Priscilla and Aquila. They had established a prosperous tent-making enterprise in Rome, providing services to both civilian and military clientele. Their workshop hummed with productivity. Their standing for excellent craftsmanship spread through personal recommendations. They had created a pleasant existence in the world's most powerful city. The edict destroyed all of that. Within mere days, they needed to dispose of what they were able to, gather what couldn't be disposed of, and become part of the streams of displaced individuals flowing through Rome's gates. Behind them remained everything they had labored to construct. Before them lay uncertainty, banishment, and the difficulty of beginning anew in a foreign territory. Numerous Jewish refugees dispersed to cities across the empire. Some traveled to Alexandria, others to Antioch. Additional people to the trading centers of Asia Minor. Priscilla and Aquila selected Corinth, a city recognized for its trade and its acceptance of foreigners. It was a sensible selection. Their professional abilities would be sought after, and the city's varied population might present possibilities for both enterprise and faith. They couldn't have realized that this enforced exile would become the basis of their most significant contribution to the historical record. In Corinth, they would encounter Paul. In encountering Paul, they would uncover their purpose, not merely as tent makers, but as instructors, guides, and protectors of the expanding Christian movement. The Roman Empire that banished them would eventually submit to the faith they assisted in spreading. The city that received them as displaced persons would become an essential center of early Christianity. Occasionally, the most significant victories emerge from the most profound setbacks, and the most impactful lives begin with the most agonizing losses. The background of Aquila. The waters of the Black Sea pounded against the rocky coastline of Pontus, a territory where Greek civilization encountered the more untamed customs of the northern regions. Here, in one of the scattered Jewish settlements that marked the empire's periphery, a young boy named Aquila absorbed the pattern of mallet and awl, needle and cord. His father's work area carried the aroma of hide and canvas, the basic materials of a profession that reached back through generations. Aquila's ancestors had arrived in Pontus many years earlier, part of the enormous dispersion that had scattered Jewish communities throughout the known world. They were accomplished artisans, focusing on the substantial fabrics required for tents, coverings, and ship sails. The labor demanded both physical strength and exactness, the capacity to connect materials that would resist wind and climate. From his youngest recollections, Aquila observed his father's hands molding these lasting fabrics. Every stitch needed to be flawless, every seam robust enough to maintain its integrity when tempests tested the tent's boundaries. There existed no space for careless labor in their profession. A defectively constructed tent could result in death for soldiers during campaigns or merchants journeying hazardous roads. The young boy absorbed more than simply technical abilities. He internalized the more profound lessons of his profession: patience, focus on particulars, the contentment of labor performed excellently. These characteristics would be useful to him across his existence, influencing not merely his business methods, but his orientation toward faith and instruction. His family's work area attracted clientele from throughout the territory. Roman military personnel preparing for expeditions required sturdy tents that could be rapidly erected and taken down. Traders needed protective coverings for their merchandise. Traveling entertainers desired vibrant awnings for their platforms. Each customer presented different specifications, instructing young Aquila to modify his abilities to diverse requirements. The Jewish population in Pontus was modest but tightly connected. Every Sabbath, families assembled to hear the age-old narratives, to recall their heritage, to sustain their bond to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Aquila matured immersed in these customs, absorbing the prayers and practices that had maintained his people through centuries of displacement. However, Pontus was distant from Jerusalem, distant from the significant centers of Jewish scholarship. The community needed to discover its own method to comprehend and practice their faith. This generated a certain adaptability and receptiveness to fresh concepts that might have been less prevalent in more established Jewish centers. When information of the Messiah ultimately reached them, they were possibly more prepared to pay attention than communities restricted by more rigid customs. As Aquila reached maturity, he confronted the decision that faced numerous young Jews in the diaspora: remain in the comfortable environment of his birthplace or pursue possibilities in the broader world. The tent-making profession presented opportunities for movement and growth. Every significant city in the empire required accomplished craftsmen, and few professions were more transportable than his. The attraction of Rome proved impossible to resist. The empire's capital symbolized the supreme marketplace for any ambitious craftsman. Military agreements alone could establish a workshop standing. The affluent patricians who populated their gardens with elaborate pavilions for hosting paid generously for accomplished work. Even the common citizens required practical items: market booths, temporary accommodations, protective coverings for their merchandise. Aquila made the challenging choice to leave Pontus behind. He gathered his implements, bid farewell to his family, and departed for the magnificent city that governed the world. The voyage would consume weeks, following the trade paths that linked the empire's distant provinces. Throughout the journey, he would encounter other travelers, hear their accounts, and start to comprehend the immense variety of the world beyond his hometown. Rome overwhelmed him initially. The city's magnitude, its clamor, its perpetual activity challenged everything he believed he understood about urban existence. Yet, progressively, he discovered his position in the intricate network of professions and associations that maintained the empire's heart functioning. His abilities were valued, his labor discovered customers, and his standing gradually increased. It was in Rome that he would encounter the woman who would transform his existence permanently. However, that meeting still awaited in the future. For the present, Aquila concentrated on establishing himself in the competitive realm of Roman trade, never conceiving that his modest profession would one day fulfill purposes far more significant than he could envision. The background of Priscilla. The marble surfaces of a Roman villa reflected the gentle illumination of oil lamps as a young girl leaned over her writing tablet, meticulously forming letters with her stylus. This was Priscilla, and her education was remarkable for a woman of her period. While most girls absorbed only household abilities, she studied literature, public speaking, and philosophy beside her brothers. Her family held an exceptional position in Roman society. They weren't among the uppermost nobility, yet they had attained substantial wealth and influence through trade and prudent political connections. More significantly, they had welcomed the intellectual inquisitiveness that characterized the finest of Roman civilization. Their residence welcomed scholars, artists, and instructors from throughout the empire. Priscilla's father held the conviction that intelligence recognized no gender limitations. He had witnessed too many capable women squander their talents on insignificant activities, while their brothers struggled through responsibilities they were inadequately prepared to manage. His daughter would be different. She would obtain the education that would permit her to think, to question, to contribute meaningfully to the world surrounding her. The girl demonstrated herself an enthusiastic student. She mastered Greek and Latin with equal proficiency, read the magnificent poets and historians, and acquired the ability to construct arguments that could maintain their position in any educated discussion. Her instructors were amazed at her rapid comprehension and her capacity to perceive connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. However, Priscilla's education extended beyond books and structured lessons. Her family's standing provided her access to the varied intellectual movements flowing through Rome. She heard visiting philosophers debate the character of the virtuous life. She paid attention to merchants relate stories of remote lands and foreign customs. She witnessed the political discussions that influenced the empire's policies. This contact with different modes of thinking prepared her for the spiritual voyage that would characterize her existence. When she encountered Jewish thought through the community of believers in Rome, she brought to it a mind trained to assess new concepts carefully and thoughtfully. She could value the ethical dimensions of Jewish instruction while comprehending its implications for the wider world. Her family's wealth had shielded them from numerous harsh realities that shaped most people's existences, yet it also generated certain expectations. A woman of her background was expected to marry advantageously, to oversee a household competently, and to produce children who would continue the family name. These expectations didn't necessarily clash with her intellectual interests, yet they did generate tension between her personal desires and social duties. The question of marriage loomed significantly as Priscilla reached adulthood. Her father could have arranged a politically beneficial match with another wealthy family. Such marriages were common among the Roman elite, based more on economic and social considerations than personal compatibility. Yet, possibly influenced by his daughter's exceptional qualities, he selected a different course. When Priscilla encountered Aquila, she met someone who appreciated her intellect as much as her attractiveness. The accomplished craftsman from Pontus possessed none of the traditional advantages that Roman families sought in a son-in-law. Yet he possessed something rarer, the capacity to see past social conventions to the individual underneath. Their courtship was atypical for its era. Rather than the structured negotiations between families that typically preceded elite marriages, they participated in extended conversations about faith, labor, and the future. They uncovered shared principles that transcended their different backgrounds. Both believed in the significance of honest work. Both appreciated learning and development, and both were attracted to the ancient wisdom of the Jewish tradition. Priscilla's choice to marry Aquila represented more than a personal decision. It was a rejection of the conventional course expected of someone in her situation. She selected substance over social standing, character over connections, and partnership over privilege. This choice would shape everything that followed in her remarkable existence. Her education had prepared her for this moment without her understanding it. All those years of study, all those conversations with scholars and instructors, all that training in public speaking and analysis, they had been preparing her for a role she couldn't have conceived. She would become not merely a wife and businesswoman, but an instructor whose influence would permeate throughout the ancient world. Their union and profession. The wedding occurred in the customary Roman fashion, with Priscilla's family hosting a celebration that reflected their social position while accommodating their daughter's unconventional selection. The ceremony united two vastly different worlds, the established Roman elite and the immigrant Jewish community. Yet the couple's shared faith and mutual respect established a foundation stronger than social convention. Their early married existence revolved around building Aquila's tent-making business into something deserving of Priscilla's capabilities. She brought to their partnership not merely her education and social connections, but a sharp understanding of Roman business methods. Her knowledge of agreements, her capacity to negotiate with suppliers, and her connections among the wealthy families of Rome transformed their small workshop into a flourishing enterprise. The tent-making profession required both partners to labor closely together. Priscilla's education proved invaluable in managing literate customers who desired specific modifications to standard designs. Her facility with languages permitted them to serve the diverse clientele that populated Rome's streets. Her understanding of Roman law assisted them in navigating the intricate regulations that governed trade guilds and foreign merchants. Yet it was in the daily pattern of their labor that their partnership truly prospered. Aquila's technical expertise, combined with Priscilla's organizational abilities, created a workshop that operated with remarkable efficiency. They developed a system where each knew instinctively what the other required, where tasks flowed seamlessly from one to the other, where the final product reflected both of their contributions. Their customer foundation grew consistently. Roman military agreements provided steady income as the legions required enormous quantities of tents, awnings, and protective covers. Wealthy families commissioned elaborate pavilions for their gardens and entertainment spaces. Merchants needed durable covers for their goods in transport. The expanding Christian community, though still small and often secretive, also started to seek them out for their reputation for honest transactions. The couple's Jewish faith influenced every aspect of their enterprise. They declined to labor on the Sabbath despite the potential loss of income. They treated their workers justly, paying wages promptly and providing decent working conditions. Their reputation for integrity spread through Rome's tightly connected commercial community, bringing them customers who appreciated trustworthy partners over the lowest prices. Their workshop became more than merely a place of business. The nature of their labor meant that customers frequently stayed for extended periods, discussing their requirements, waiting for repairs, or simply seeking shelter from the busy streets. Priscilla and Aquila discovered that many of these visitors were hungry for conversation that went beyond commercial transactions. The couple started to host informal assemblies in their workshop and residence. These sessions began as simple meals shared with customers and workers, yet gradually evolved into discussions about faith, philosophy, and the meaning of existence. Priscilla's education made her a natural instructor, while Aquila's practical wisdom provided grounding for more abstract discussions. Information about these assemblies spread through Rome's Jewish community. Individuals began to seek out the tent makers, not merely for their accomplished labor, but for the opportunity to participate in thoughtful conversation about matters of faith and existence. The couple discovered themselves becoming informal leaders in their community, individuals to whom others turned for guidance and support. This role prepared them for what was to come. When the expanding Christian movement started to reach Rome, Priscilla and Aquila were already recognized as individuals who could bridge different worlds. Their business success provided them credibility in the broader Roman community, while their faith and teaching capacity made them natural leaders among Jewish believers. Their marriage had become more than a personal relationship. It was a partnership that combined their individual strengths into something greater than either could accomplish alone. Priscilla's intellect and education merged with Aquila's practical abilities and spiritual wisdom. Together, they established a model of Christian marriage that would influence countless couples in the years ahead. The pattern of their daily labor continued, yet now it carried deeper significance. Each tent they created, each customer they served, each conversation they shared was part of a larger purpose. They were constructing more than a business. They were creating a foundation for the ministry that would characterize their lives. The proclamation of Claudius. The morning began like any other in the tent-making establishment. Priscilla was examining a roll of heavy canvas, while Aquila worked on reinforcing the corner connections of a large military tent. The familiar sounds of their neighborhood drifted through the open entrance, merchants calling out their merchandise, children playing in the narrow streets, the constant rumble of carts on stone pavement. Then Marcus arrived, out of breath and pale. Their neighbor rushed into the workshop with news that would destroy their carefully constructed world. Emperor Claudius had released a proclamation: all Jews must depart Rome within 30 days. No exceptions, no appeals, no postponements. The gravity of the announcement settled over them like a heavy covering. Around them, the implements of their profession suddenly seemed foreign, temporary. The half-completed tent that had represented tomorrow's income now mocked them with its unfinished state. The customer orders awaiting fulfillment would remain unfulfilled. The existence they had constructed with such care was about to be swept away by imperial decree. Priscilla put down the fabric she had been examining. Her educated mind immediately started calculating the implications. 30 days to liquidate an enterprise built over years. 30 days to sell property, collect debts owed, and somehow convert a life's work into something portable enough to carry into banishment. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. Aquila's response was more visceral, his hands clenched into fists, then slowly relaxed. He had survived being uprooted once before, leaving his family in Pontus to construct a new existence in Rome. He could do it again. Yet the anger burned quietly in his chest, not merely at the emperor's arbitrary decision, but at the fundamental vulnerability of their existence. The reasons behind Claudius's proclamation remained unclear. Some whispered about riots in the Jewish quarter, others about political intrigue in the imperial court. There were rumors of a troublemaker named Chrestus, who had stirred up controversy in the synagogues. Yet, the specific reasons mattered less than the immediate reality. They had to leave. The following weeks passed in a blur of desperate activity. Priscilla used her family connections to find buyers for their equipment and remaining inventory. The prices were far below fair value. Everyone knew the Jews were forced sellers, and the market adjusted accordingly. Still, they managed to convert enough of their assets into portable wealth to fund their exile. Aquila spent his time collecting outstanding debts and fulfilling their most important contracts. His reputation for integrity remained intact even in crisis. Customers who owed them money paid promptly, understanding that the tent-maker's need was urgent. Some even offered to help with the transition, though their options were limited. The most difficult part was saying goodbye to the Christian community that had begun to form around their workshop. These fellow believers had become more than customers or friends. They were family in faith. The thought of leaving them behind to face an uncertain future without support weighed heavily on both Priscilla and Aquila. Yet, within their sorrow lay the seeds of something greater. Several of the Roman Christians approached them with letters of introduction to believers in other cities. They would not be traveling into complete darkness. There were individuals who would welcome them, communities that would offer support, connections that transcended the boundaries of cities and empires. The night before their departure, they hosted a final assembly in their workshop. The space that had once bustled with commercial activity now served as a place of prayer and farewell. Those who had grown in faith through their instruction assembled to receive final encouragement and to offer their own support for the journey ahead. Priscilla spoke to the group about providence and purpose. Even in exile, she reminded them, God's plans continued to unfold. Perhaps their forced departure was not an ending, but a beginning, an opportunity to carry their faith and their gifts to new places where they might serve in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Aquila added his own words of encouragement. Persecution might scatter them, yet it couldn't destroy their bond in Christ. The abilities they had learned, the faith they had developed, the love they had shared, these things were portable. They could be rebuilt anywhere, with any group of believers willing to commit to the same principles. As dawn broke over Rome, Priscilla and Aquila loaded their cart with the few possessions they could carry. Behind them lay the ruins of their comfortable existence. Ahead lay the unknown roads that would lead them to their destiny. They had no way of knowing that this forced exodus would become the foundation of their greatest contribution to the historical record. The imperial proclamation that meant to silence them would ultimately amplify their voice across the empire. The exile that seemed to end their ministry would actually expand it beyond anything they could have achieved by staying in Rome. Occasionally, God's greatest gifts arrive, wrapped in the most painful circumstances. Coming to Corinth. The harbor city of Corinth sprawled before them like an enormous amphitheater, its buildings climbing the slopes that led up to the towering Corinth. Vessels from across the Mediterranean crowded the harbor, their masts creating a forest of wood and rope against the blue sky. The air carried the mingled scents of salt water, exotic spices, and the less pleasant odors of a working port. Priscilla and Aquila stood at the edge of the city with their meager possessions, taking in the scene that would become their new residence. Corinth was nothing like Rome, where the imperial capital projected power and permanence through its marble monuments. This place pulsed with commercial energy and transient opportunity. Money changed hands quickly here. Fortunes were made and lost with the tides, and individuals came and went like the ships that filled the harbor. The city's reputation preceded it. Corinth was known throughout the empire for its wealth, its vice, and its willingness to welcome anyone who could contribute to its prosperity. The phrase Corinthian girl had become synonymous with prostitution, while to live like a Corinthian meant to embrace a lifestyle of luxury and moral flexibility. For pious Jews seeking to rebuild their lives, it seemed an unlikely refuge. Yet beneath the surface chaos lay opportunities for those willing to work. The constant flow of merchants, soldiers, and travelers created demand for skilled craftsmen. Ships needed repairs. Temporary shelters required construction, and the wealthy citizens who controlled the city's trade wanted luxurious pavilions for their entertainment. The tent-making profession would find ready customers here. Finding lodging proved challenging. The city's innkeepers charged premium rates, knowing that many arrivals were desperate for immediate shelter. Priscilla and Aquila eventually secured a small room in a crowded boarding house near the commercial district. The accommodations were basic, yet the location would allow them to quickly establish their business presence. Their first priority was securing a workspace. They found a small establishment in the leather workers' quarter, a narrow space that reminded them painfully of their first humble beginnings in Rome. The rent was reasonable, and the location provided access to the suppliers and customers they would need to restart their profession. Setting up the new workshop required careful allocation of their limited resources. They had managed to bring some of their essential tools from Rome, yet many items needed to be replaced or repaired. Local craftsmen proved helpful, offering advice about suppliers and sharing the practical knowledge that every newcomer needed to navigate the city's commercial landscape. The labor itself provided a welcome distraction from the grief of their losses. Each day brought familiar rhythms, examining materials, planning designs, cutting and sewing the heavy fabrics that would become tents and awnings. Their hands remembered the abilities, even when their hearts struggled with the upheaval of starting over. Information about their arrival spread through Corinth's Jewish community. The city hosted a significant population of Jewish merchants and craftsmen, many of whom had also come from other parts of the empire, seeking economic opportunities. These fellow believers offered practical support and spiritual fellowship that helped ease the transition. The local synagogue became a focal point for their new existence. Each Sabbath, they joined their fellow Jews in worship and study, finding comfort in the familiar prayers and ancient stories. The synagogue also served as an informal commercial network where community members shared information about business opportunities and customer needs. Gradually, their reputation for quality work began to attract customers. Roman officials stationed in the city needed durable tents for military exercises. Wealthy merchants commissioned elaborate awnings for their shops and homes. The expanding Christian community, though still small and often secretive, began to seek them out for their reputation for honest dealings and spiritual depth. Yet, it was the arrival of a particular customer that would transform their new beginning into something far greater than a simple business restart. Paul of Tarsus appeared at their workshop one afternoon, travel-worn and searching for both work and fellowship. In that moment, 3 lives intersected in ways that would reshape the ancient world. The exiles who had lost everything in Rome were about to discover that their greatest contribution to the historical record lay not in what they had left behind, but in what they were about to construct together. The tent-making establishment in Corinth would become a launching pad for a ministry that would span continents and centuries. Encountering Paul, the afternoon sunlight slanted through the workshop's open doorway when the stranger appeared. Priscilla glanced up from her needlework to see a man of medium height, his dark hair streaked with premature gray, his clothing marked by hard travel. There was something in his bearing that suggested both authority and vulnerability, the posture of someone accustomed to commanding attention but currently in need of assistance. Aquila set down his tools and approached the newcomer. Years of working with diverse customers had taught him to read individuals quickly, and this visitor intrigued him. The man's hands showed the calluses of manual labor, yet his manner of speaking suggested education and refinement. Most telling of all, he carried himself with a particular dignity that marked fellow Jews navigating the complex world of Roman trade. "I am Paul," the stranger said, his voice carrying the accent of someone from the eastern provinces. "I seek work in the tent-making profession, and I have heard that your establishment maintains the highest standards." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "I also hope to find fellowship with those who share my faith." The words carried layers of meaning that Priscilla and Aquila immediately understood. In a city like Corinth, where religious diversity was the norm but Jewish believers often felt isolated, the search for fellowship was as important as the search for work. This Paul was looking for more than employment. He was seeking community. Aquila invited him to examine their current projects. Paul's knowledge of the profession became immediately apparent as he discussed the merits of different stitching techniques and evaluated the quality of their materials. His expertise was undeniable, yet it was his passion for the work that impressed them most. He spoke of tent making, not as mere labor, but as a craft that served essential human needs. Priscilla joined the conversation, her educated manner and sharp questions drawing out more of Paul's story. He had been trained in the profession as a young man, he explained, yet his existence had taken unexpected turns. He had become an instructor, a traveler, a messenger, carrying urgent news to communities across the empire. The tent-making abilities provided practical support for his primary mission. The nature of that mission gradually became clear through their conversation. Paul was a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, the Jewish teacher whose movement had been growing throughout the empire. More than that, he was a leader in the movement, someone who had been personally commissioned to carry the message to non-Jewish populations. His arrival in Corinth was part of a larger journey that had already taken him to major cities across the eastern Mediterranean. For Priscilla and Aquila, this revelation was both exciting and sobering. They had heard whispers about the followers of Jesus, had even met a few believers during their time in Rome. The movement intrigued them with its combination of Jewish moral teaching and universal appeal. Yet they had never encountered someone so deeply committed to spreading this message, someone who had made it the central purpose of his existence. Paul's immediate need was practical. He required both work and lodging, having arrived in Corinth with limited resources. The couple's response reflected both their natural hospitality and their growing conviction that this meeting was more than coincidence. They offered him not merely employment in their workshop, but a place to stay in their modest living quarters above the establishment. The arrangement benefited everyone involved. Paul's abilities enhanced their workshop's capacity and quality. His knowledge of markets throughout the empire provided valuable insights for their business planning. Most importantly, his presence brought a depth of spiritual insight that enriched their daily conversations and evening meals. As the days passed, Paul's story unfolded in fragments shared during work breaks and evening discussions. He spoke of his earlier existence as a persecutor of Christians, his dramatic conversion experience, his years of preparation and training. He described the churches he had established, the challenges he had faced, the vision that drove him forward despite constant opposition. Priscilla found herself drawn into theological discussions that challenged and expanded her understanding of faith. Paul's capacity to connect Jewish scripture with the person and work of Jesus opened new dimensions of meaning that she had never considered. Her education made her an ideal conversation partner, someone who could follow his arguments and pose thoughtful questions. Aquila contributed his own perspectives, shaped by years of practical experience in diverse communities. His insights into human nature and social dynamics helped Paul understand the specific challenges that Christian communities faced in cities like Corinth. Together, the three of them began to develop strategies for effective ministry in complex urban environments. The workshop gradually became more than a place of business. It was becoming a center of Christian activity in Corinth, a place where believers could gather for fellowship, instruction, and mutual support. Paul's teaching, combined with Priscilla and Aquila's hospitality, created an environment where faith could flourish, despite the challenging circumstances of their adopted city. Shared existence in Corinth. The pattern of their shared existence developed like a well-rehearsed symphony. Each morning began before dawn, with Paul joining Priscilla and Aquila for the daily prayers that connected them to their ancestral faith. The familiar words took on new meaning as they began each day acknowledging the God who had brought them together in this foreign city. After prayers came the practical labor that sustained their little community. The workshop buzzed with activity as they tackled orders for military tents, merchant awnings, and the countless smaller items that kept their enterprise profitable. Paul's presence doubled their capacity, yet more importantly, it brought a sense of purpose that transformed routine labor into something approaching worship. Their conversations during work revealed the depth of Paul's theological understanding. He could discuss the finest points of Jewish law while simultaneously explaining how Jesus had fulfilled and transformed those ancient requirements. Priscilla found herself drawing on her classical education to engage with his arguments, while Aquila contributed insights from his practical experience with diverse communities. The midday meal became a highlight of their daily routine. They would gather in the small living space above the workshop, sharing simple food while Paul told stories from his travels. He painted vivid pictures of the churches he had established, the individuals he had met, the challenges and triumphs that marked his ministry. Through these stories, Priscilla and Aquila began to understand the larger movement of which they were becoming a part. Paul's descriptions of other Christian communities revealed both the universal appeal of the gospel and the particular challenges it faced in different cultural contexts. In Galatia, he had struggled with Jewish believers who wanted to impose circumcision on Gentile converts. In Thessalonica, he had dealt with persecution from both Jewish and Roman authorities. Each situation required different approaches, different emphases, different strategies. These discussions helped Priscilla and Aquila understand their own role in Corinth's expanding Christian community. The city's cosmopolitan nature presented unique opportunities and challenges. Its diverse population was open to new ideas, yet it was also deeply committed to the pursuit of wealth and pleasure that characterized Corinthian culture. How could the gospel message take root in such soil? Evenings brought another dimension to their shared existence. After the day's labor was finished and the establishment was closed, they would often host assemblies for other believers in the city. These meetings started small, with just a few individuals sharing meals and discussing their faith. Yet information spread, and gradually their simple assemblies grew into something approaching a house church. The composition of their evening assemblies reflected Corinth's diverse population. Wealthy merchants sat beside freed slaves. Roman officials shared meals with Jewish craftsmen. Educated Greeks engaged in discussions with barely literate laborers. The gospel message had a leveling effect that challenged the social hierarchies that normally governed urban existence. Priscilla discovered that her education made her an effective instructor in these assemblies. She could explain complex theological concepts in ways that made them accessible to individuals from vastly different backgrounds. Her capacity to bridge the gap between Jewish and Gentile thinking proved invaluable as the community struggled to understand what it meant to follow Jesus in a pagan city. Aquila's practical wisdom provided grounding for the more theoretical discussions. When conversations became too abstract, he would bring them back to concrete applications. How should a Christian merchant conduct business? What obligations did believing slaves have to unbelieving masters? How could families maintain their faith while participating in civic existence? Paul's role in these assemblies evolved as his relationship with the community deepened. Initially, he dominated the discussions, sharing his apostolic authority and extensive knowledge. Yet gradually, he began to encourage others to contribute their own insights and experiences. Priscilla and Aquila found themselves becoming co-instructors, partners in the ministry of instruction and encouragement. The success of their evening assemblies created new challenges. As more individuals joined them, their small living space became inadequate. They began to meet in the workshop itself, moving aside the tools and materials to create space for worship and fellowship. The smell of leather and canvas became associated with prayer and teaching, creating a unique atmosphere where the sacred and practical merged into one unified experience. Their shared meals took on the character of the communion that Jesus had instituted with his disciples. Paul taught them the significance of breaking bread together, of sharing the cup that symbolized Christ's sacrifice. These simple acts transformed their evening assemblies from social occasions into worship experiences that connected them directly to the heart of their faith. Yet their existence together wasn't without tensions. Paul's passionate commitment to his mission sometimes clashed with the practical realities of running an enterprise. He would become so absorbed in theological discussions that work schedules suffered. Customers would arrive to find the workshop empty because Paul had left to preach in the marketplace or synagogue. These conflicts required careful navigation. Priscilla and Aquila understood Paul's calling, yet they also recognized their responsibility to maintain the business that supported all three of them. They developed systems that allowed Paul the freedom to pursue his ministry while ensuring that customer commitments were met. The arrangement also created opportunities for Paul to learn from his hosts. His background as a Pharisee had given him extensive knowledge of Jewish law and tradition, yet limited experience with the practical challenges of daily existence in a diverse urban community. Priscilla and Aquila's years of navigating Roman commercial culture provided insights that enriched his understanding of how the gospel should be applied in real-world situations. Their months together in Corinth created bonds that would endure for the rest of their lives. More than friendship, more than business partnership, they had become family in the deepest sense. They had shared not merely living space and daily labor, but hopes, fears, dreams, and the profound sense of purpose that came from participating in something larger than themselves. The tent-making establishment had become a kind of seminary, a place where three devoted believers worked out the practical implications of their faith while serving the needs of their adopted city. The abilities they developed there in teaching, in community building, in balancing spiritual and practical concerns would serve them well in the challenges that lay ahead. Paul's work in Corinth. The marketplace of Corinth pulsed with the energy of international trade. Merchants from Egypt displayed bolts of fine linen, while traders from Gaul offered furs and amber. In the midst of this commercial chaos, Paul found his platform. He would position himself near the fountain where travelers gathered to refresh themselves, and there he would begin to speak about a kingdom that transcended all earthly commerce. His message was revolutionary in its simplicity. The God of the Jews had sent his Son to die for the sins of all humanity, not merely Jews but Gentiles as well. This Jesus had risen from the dead, proving his divine nature and opening the way for eternal life to anyone who believed. The implications were staggering. Social barriers meant nothing, ethnic distinctions were irrelevant, and economic status carried no weight in determining an individual's worth before God. The response to Paul's preaching was immediate and polarized. Some listeners were intrigued by his message of hope and forgiveness. Others were offended by his claims about Jesus' divinity. Still, others were threatened by the social implications of his teaching. In a city built on rigid hierarchies and careful distinctions between citizens and slaves, Romans and foreigners, his message of universal equality was dangerous. The local synagogue provided Paul's first regular venue for teaching. Each Sabbath, he would join the worship service and then engage in the discussions that followed. His knowledge of Scripture was undeniable, yet his interpretation of ancient prophecies in light of Jesus' existence and death challenged traditional understanding in ways that made many uncomfortable. Priscilla and Aquila became Paul's most reliable supporters in these synagogue debates. Aquila's practical wisdom helped ground Paul's more abstract theological arguments, while Priscilla's education allowed her to engage with the intellectual challenges that critics raised. Together, they formed a teaching team that could address questions from multiple perspectives. Yet, the synagogue discussions also generated opposition. Many of the Jewish leaders saw Paul's message as a threat to their authority and to the careful accommodation they had worked out with Roman officials. His claims about Jesus being the Messiah challenged fundamental assumptions about what God's salvation would look like when it finally came. The tensions came to a head during one particularly heated Sabbath discussion. Paul had been explaining how Jesus fulfilled the prophecies about the suffering servant in Isaiah when several prominent synagogue members accused him of blasphemy. The confrontation grew so intense that Paul was asked to leave and not return. Rather than retreat, Paul made a dramatic gesture that would define the rest of his ministry in Corinth. He shook the dust from his clothing and declared that he was turning his attention to the Gentiles. If the Jewish community wouldn't accept his message, he would take it to those who would listen with open hearts. This decision created both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, it freed Paul from the constraints of synagogue politics and allowed him to present his message in terms that made sense to non-Jewish audiences. On the other hand, it left him vulnerable to fresh kinds of resistance from Roman officials who viewed with suspicion any movement that appeared to destabilize social order. The workshop of Priscilla and Aquila gained even greater importance as Paul's operational headquarters. When the synagogue no longer welcomed him, their evening assemblies became the principal setting for instruction and worship. The space designed for creating tents was converted into one of the earliest Gentile Christian congregations in the Roman Empire. The effectiveness of Paul's Gentile ministry generated practical difficulties that demanded creative approaches. Fresh converts needed training in fundamental Christian principles, yet they lacked the Jewish foundation that had equipped earlier believers for grasping Jesus' significance. Instruction sessions that might have required weeks with Jewish audiences now demanded months of patient explanation. Priscilla demonstrated particular talent for spanning this cultural divide. Her classical education had acquainted her with Greek philosophical thought and Roman religious customs, enabling her to express Christian ideas in language that resonated with Gentile converts. She could articulate how Christ satisfied humanity's most profound yearnings in ways that connected with their prior religious encounters. The expanding Christian community also encountered external pressures. Roman authorities started taking notice of the movement, especially as it drew prominent citizens and generated marketplace tensions. Some traders protested that Christian instruction about honesty and equitable conduct was eroding customary business methods. Paul received warnings from multiple sources: Jewish authorities who regarded him as a betrayer, Roman administrators who perceived him as a disruptor, and commercial interests who resented his sway over their clientele. Priscilla and Aquila found themselves functioning not merely as ministry collaborators, but as guardians and counselors, assisting Paul in maneuvering through these perilous circumstances. Despite the resistance, the congregation in Corinth kept expanding. The workshop that had begun as a sanctuary for 3 Jewish exiles had transformed into the birthplace of a movement that would ultimately reshape the Roman Empire. The tents they constructed during daylight provided practical protection for travelers, yet the spiritual refuge they offered in the evening would demonstrate far more lasting. Expansion of the house congregation. The transformation commenced gradually, almost invisibly. What began as casual evening dialogues between 3 tent makers developed into regular assemblies that attracted believers from throughout Corinth's varied population. The workshop that hummed with commercial energy during daylight became a place of worship and instruction when the sun descended over the Aegean. The physical location itself narrated the story of this development. During sunlight hours, the room was occupied with the implements and supplies of their profession: cutting surfaces covered with canvas and hide, needles and awls positioned in deliberate sequence, rolls of fabric stacked against the surfaces. Yet, as evening arrived, these practical objects were shifted aside to create room for simple wooden benches and low surfaces where believers could share their communal meals. The aroma of cooking food started to blend with the recognizable scents of leather and canvas. Priscilla had realized that sharing meals forged connections between individuals that no quantity of structured instruction could accomplish. Breaking bread together erased the social divisions that ordinarily separated people in Roman civilization. Enslaved people sat alongside their owners, impoverished laborers shared food with affluent traders, and foreign guests found themselves received as family. Paul's instructional approach adapted to this close-knit environment. Rather than the structured rhetoric he might have employed in a synagogue or public setting, he embraced a conversational method that welcomed inquiries and dialogue. He would commence with narratives from his journeys, describing the congregations he had founded and the individuals he had encountered, then progressively extract spiritual insights from these encounters. Priscilla and Aquila discovered their own instructional voices surfacing in these assemblies. Paul prompted them to contribute their perspectives and encounters, acknowledging that their viewpoint as prosperous business owners added legitimacy to the Christian teaching. They could respond to practical inquiries about how faith should shape daily existence in ways that augmented Paul's more theological instruction. The house congregation drew individuals for various reasons. Some arrived pursuing intellectual engagement. The dialogues frequently addressed philosophy, ethics, and existence's purpose in ways that satisfied minds seeking deeper comprehension. Others were attracted by the sense of belonging, the sensation of being appreciated and welcomed, regardless of their social position or personal background. Still, others came because of the practical assistance the community offered. When members encountered financial struggles, sickness, or family emergencies, the congregation responded with both material aid and emotional comfort. This practical concern drew notice throughout the city as people witnessed Christians caring for one another in ways that surpassed normal social duties. The congregation's diversity generated both possibilities and difficulties. Prosperous members could supply financial backing for the community's endeavors, yet their presence occasionally intimidated less affluent believers. Educated members enhanced the quality of dialogues, yet their sophisticated inquiries could perplex newer converts. Former pagans contributed enthusiasm and fresh viewpoints, yet they also needed extensive instruction in basic Christian foundations. Paul, Priscilla, and Aquila crafted approaches for handling this diversity. They established regular instruction sessions for new converts, guaranteeing that everyone possessed a solid grounding in Christian teaching. They generated opportunities for wealthy members to contribute financially, while stressing that spiritual guidance was founded on character rather than economic position. The house congregation's expansion also demanded practical modifications. As participation grew, the workshop space became insufficient. They commenced meeting in the small courtyard behind the structure when climate allowed, and ultimately began conducting multiple smaller assemblies throughout the week to accommodate everyone who desired to participate. This multiplication of meetings generated fresh opportunities for leadership cultivation. Priscilla and Aquila discovered themselves assuming responsibility for some of these smaller assemblies, developing their abilities as instructors and shepherds. The experience equipped them for the larger leadership positions they would ultimately take on when Paul progressed to other cities. The effectiveness of their house congregation attracted notice from both advocates and detractors. Other Christian groups in the city started modeling their endeavors on what they observed occurring in the tentmaker's workshop. Simultaneously, their increasing prominence made them targets for those who resisted the Christian movement. Roman administrators started taking notice of the regular assemblies, especially as they attracted prominent citizens who might possess political sway. Some neighbors protested about the heightened pedestrian activity and the unusual endeavors taking place in what was intended to be a commercial establishment. Jewish authorities, who had dismissed Paul's teaching, perceived the house congregation's effectiveness as a challenge to their own influence and standing in the community. These pressures demanded careful maneuvering. The leadership group had to weigh their aspiration for expansion with the requirement for protection. They crafted systems for evaluating new members and safeguarding the community from infiltrators who might report their endeavors to hostile authorities. Despite these difficulties, the house congregation kept prospering. The fusion of Paul's apostolic influence, Priscilla's educational foundation, and Aquila's practical insight created a leadership group that could respond to the varied requirements of their expanding congregation. The workshop that had been planned as a temporary sanctuary for 3 Jewish exiles had transformed into the cornerstone of one of the most consequential congregations in the early Christian movement. The patterns of daily existence had discovered their ideal equilibrium. Morning prayers linked them to their ancestral faith. Daylight hours supplied the income that maintained their ministry, and evening assemblies established the spiritual community that gave their existences significance and intention. They had realized that the sacred and the practical could coexist in complete unity when both were devoted to fulfilling God's intentions. Paul's departure and their summons. The information arrived as Paul completed examining a particularly intricate tent design that had tested even his substantial abilities. A courier had arrived with word from the congregations in Macedonia. They required Paul's immediate presence. Difficulties had emerged that demanded apostolic action, disputes that endangered to obliterate communities he had labored years to establish. Paul set aside his implements and assembled Priscilla and Aquila for a dialogue that would alter all their existences. The moment had arrived for him to progress onward, to pursue the assignment that had transported him to Corinth but would not permit him to remain there perpetually. The congregations across the empire required his guidance, and he could not disregard their pressing requests for assistance. The choice was not unanticipated. Paul had always been transparent about his summons as a traveling apostle, someone whose assignment demanded constant movement and temporary residence in the communities he served. Yet, knowing that departure was unavoidable did not make the reality any less difficult for the 3 companions who had grown so connected during their months together. Priscilla sensed the gravity of the instant, settling over her like a weighty covering. Paul's departure would signify more than losing a companion and ministry collaborator. It would compel her and Aquila to address questions they had been postponing about their own future and summons. Were they intended to remain in Corinth, perpetuating the work Paul had initiated? Or were they being summoned to something different, something more expansive than sustaining a prosperous tent-making enterprise? Aquila's response was characteristically pragmatic. Someone needed to continue guiding the house congregation they had constructed together. The fresh converts demanded ongoing instruction. The established believers required continued encouragement. And the intricate dynamics of their varied congregation necessitated careful oversight. If Paul couldn't supply that guidance, then others would have to advance. Yet Paul's vision for their future reached beyond simply preserving what already existed. During their months of laboring and praying together, he had witnessed their talents and acknowledged their capacity for wider ministry. Priscilla's intellectual capabilities and instructional abilities, combined with Aquila's practical insight and leadership experience, made them perfect candidates for founding new congregations in cities where the gospel had not yet established roots. The dialogue that ensued stretched late into the evening as the three companions investigated possibilities they had never earnestly contemplated. Paul communicated his conviction that God was summoning them to more than a supporting position in his ministry. They were being summoned to become congregation planters themselves, collaborators in the broader assignment of disseminating the gospel across the Roman Empire. This summons would demand sacrifices that exceeded anything they had previously considered. Pursuing Paul's example would signify abandoning the stability of their established enterprise, the comfort of their expanding community in Corinth, and the recognizable patterns of existence they had labored so intensely to reconstruct after their expulsion from Rome. It would signify embracing uncertainty, accepting peril, and dedicating their existences to service rather than personal advancement. Still, the more they examined the possibility, the more it seemed like a natural advancement rather than a dramatic shift. Their months with Paul had been preparation for precisely this kind of ministry. They had absorbed how to instruct, to shepherd, to navigate the intricate difficulties of guiding diverse Christian communities. They had uncovered talents they never realized they possessed and cultivated abilities they never imagined they would require. Priscilla found herself especially attracted to the instructional dimensions of the summons. Her dialogues with new converts had disclosed her capacity to articulate intricate theological ideas in ways that made them accessible to individuals from vastly different backgrounds. The possibility of employing these talents in new environments with fresh audiences seeking the gospel teaching energized her more than any business prospect ever had. Aquila was drawn to the congregation planting dimension of the summons. His experience in founding their enterprise in Corinth had instructed him valuable insights about constructing sustainable institutions in foreign settings. Those identical abilities could be directed toward establishing Christian communities that would endure and prosper long after their founders progressed to other endeavors. The practical particulars of such a summons remained to be resolved. They would need to prepare others to assume their responsibilities in Corinth, organize for the continuing guidance of the house congregation, and equip themselves for the requirements of traveling ministry. Most significantly, they would need to craft their own method to congregation planting that built upon Paul's approaches while reflecting their distinctive talents and viewpoints. Paul proposed taking them with him on his following voyage, supplying them with direct experience in apostolic ministry, while introducing them to the system of congregations and leaders that spanned the empire. The opportunity would permit them to witness different methods to evangelism and congregation guidance while contributing their own abilities to the assignment. As their dialogue concluded, all three acknowledged that they had reached a pivotal moment. The comfortable existence they had constructed in Corinth was about to be transformed into something far more demanding, yet ultimately more meaningful. They were embracing a summons that would transport them far from the stability of their workshop, but would multiply their influence beyond anything they could accomplish by remaining in one location. The tent-making profession that had united them would persist in supporting their ministry, supplying both income and credibility as they journeyed from city to city. Yet now their primary identity would transition from artisans who happened to be Christians to missionaries who happened to be accomplished in a valuable profession. The seeds of this transformation had been planted months earlier when Paul first appeared at their workshop pursuing work and fellowship. Now, those seeds were prepared to produce fruit that would nourish hungry souls across the Roman Empire. Expansion of the house congregation. Within the boundaries of their modest residence in Corinth, something remarkable starts to emerge. The fragrance of leather and fresh bread mingles with the soft murmur of voices as believers assemble each evening. Priscilla moves among her guests with understated grace, providing water and simple food, while Aquila adjusts the oil lamps to illuminate weathered faces with warm light. These early assemblies possess a delicate simplicity that would influence Christianity for centuries. No magnificent cathedrals ascend here, no intricate rituals command attention. Rather, believers sit on simple stools and woven mats, their voices merging in songs that resonate through narrow streets. The house congregation becomes a refuge where social divisions dissolve like morning mist. Roman citizens discover themselves beside Greek traders. Jewish converts share meals with Gentile believers. Women speak openly about their faith, their voices bearing equal significance with men. This revolutionary equality emerges from the fertile ground of Priscilla and Aquila's hospitality. They establish space where the impossible becomes ordinary. Paul's instruction resonates through their residence like gentle thunder. His words about Christ's love transform hearts, while Priscilla and Aquila supply the steady foundation that permits such transformation to flourish. They comprehend that changed existences need nurturing settings to take root and develop. The couple's tent-making enterprise becomes interlaced with their ministry. Clientele who arrive seeking repairs frequently depart with something far more precious than mended canvas. Dialogues about thread strength lead to discussions about spiritual resilience. Questions about waterproofing tents evolve into conversations about protection from existence's storms. Their residence pulses with endeavor from sunrise to sunset. Morning brings the pattern of hammers and awls. Afternoon sees neighbors stopping by for dialogue and cooling beverages. Evening transforms their workshop into a sacred space where broken hearts discover healing and searching souls uncover purpose. Information spreads through Corinth's marketplaces about this unusual couple. Traders whisper about the Jewish tent makers who receive everyone. Sailors returning from distant harbors relate stories of the warm hospitality they encountered in a simple residence near the harbor. These whispers carry influence that structured preaching cannot equal. The house congregation expands not through grand demonstrations but through innumerable small acts of kindness. Priscilla's gentle correction of theological misunderstanding, Aquila's patient clarification of Hebrew customs, their shared meals that span cultural separations. Each demonstration plants seeds that blossom into lasting faith. Young believers discover mentorship in their residence. Older converts uncover renewed intention. The broken discover healing. The lost discover direction. This pattern repeats as the congregation takes root in hearts prepared by the couple's patient cultivation. Their influence reaches beyond their own boundaries. Other residences in Corinth commence hosting similar assemblies. The example that Priscilla and Aquila perfect spreads like morning illumination across the city. House congregations bloom in neighborhoods throughout the port, each one reflecting the warmth and insight they first demonstrated. The couple confronts difficulties that test their determination. Roman authorities become suspicious of these regular assemblies. Jewish authorities express concern about their mixing with Gentiles. Economic pressures mount as their business effectiveness attracts unwanted notice. Still, they persist, their faith anchored in something more profound than circumstance. Paul witnesses this transformation with amazement. His own preaching reaches many, yet he acknowledges that lasting transformation occurs in the quiet instances when Priscilla offers counsel to struggling wives or when Aquila shares his implements with men pursuing honest labor. Their ministry complements his perfectly, supplying the personal dimension that makes abstract theology tangible. The house congregation becomes a laboratory for Christian existence. Questions emerge daily that require insight beyond human comprehension. How should believers manage disputes? What duties do they have to unbelieving family members? How can they sustain their faith while participating in Roman civilization? Priscilla and Aquila guide these dialogues with gentle authority, assisting the community to uncover answers through patient exchange. Their residence witnesses baptisms that transform existences. Tears of joy mingle with harbor water as new believers publicly proclaim their faith. The couple's presence at these instances adds significance to the ceremony, their own voyage from Rome to Corinth serving as testament to God's faithfulness through trials. As months progress, the house congregation develops its own pattern. Certain evenings concentrate on instruction, others emphasize prayer and worship. Some nights center on practical matters like caring for widows or supporting struggling families. This equilibrium reflects Priscilla and Aquila's comprehension that faith must respond to both spiritual and physical requirements. The couple's partnership becomes an example for other marriages within the community. Their mutual regard and shared ministry inspire couples to perceive their relationships as platforms for service, rather than merely personal satisfaction. This transformation ripples through families, strengthening the congregation's foundation. Their influence shapes the very essence of Christianity in Corinth. The principles they establish, hospitality, inclusion, practical service, gentle instruction, become hallmarks of congregations that will outlast empires. In their humble residence, the future of Christian community takes form through daily acts of love and faithfulness. Paul's departure and their summons. The morning arrives with unusual quietness. Paul stands at the threshold of their residence, his traveling cloak already secured, his weathered hands grasping the staff that has carried him across the empire. The moment has arrived for departure, and the gravity of this instant settles over the residence like evening shadows. Priscilla observes from the doorway as neighbors start to assemble. Information has spread through the Christian community that their instructor and companion will soon pursue his voyage. Faces reflect the blend of gratitude and sorrow that accompanies such farewells. Paul's presence has transformed their city, yet his summons demands movement like wind that cannot be restrained. Aquila steps forward, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. The two men embrace with the fierce affection of brothers who have shared danger and triumph. Their collaboration in tent-making has evolved into something more profound, a spiritual bond forged through months of shared labor and late-night dialogues about God's intentions. Paul's words bear the gentle authority that has characterized his ministry in Corinth. He speaks of his love for this community, his pride in their development, his confidence in their future. Still, beneath his encouragement lies an unspoken truth. The congregation must learn to stand without him. Leadership cannot depend on one man's presence. The couple senses this transition stirring something within their own hearts. They have served faithfully as hosts and supporters, yet Paul's departure creates space for new possibilities. The Holy Spirit whispers possibilities that extend beyond their current comfortable routine. Their summons begins to expand like dawn breaking over calm waters. In the days following Paul's departure, the house congregation continues its assemblies, yet the atmosphere shifts subtly. Without Paul's commanding presence, others must advance to fill the void. Priscilla discovers herself responding to theological questions with increasing confidence. Aquila assumes more instructional responsibilities, his calm manner assisting newer believers to comprehend intricate spiritual ideas. The transformation occurs gradually, like seasons transforming. What begins as necessity evolves into recognition of talents they never fully realized they possessed. Their years of listening to Paul's instruction, combined with their own profound study of Scripture, have equipped them for this instant. They realize that supporting ministry has prepared them for guiding it. Dialogues with other believers disclose the depth of their influence. Young Christians speak of how Priscilla's gentle corrections have shaped their comprehension. Older converts mention how Aquila's patience has assisted them to navigate difficult passages in Scripture. The couple realizes that their quiet service has been preparation for greater responsibility. Their tent-making enterprise supplies perfect metaphors for spiritual development. Just as they carefully select materials for durability and function, they start to assist believers to choose spiritual practices that will strengthen their faith. The abilities they employ to create weather-resistant shelters translate beautifully to constructing resilient Christian character. A defining instant arrives when visiting believers from nearby cities pursue their counsel. These travelers have heard accounts of the vibrant congregation in Corinth and desire to comprehend how such spiritual health developed. As Priscilla and Aquila communicate their experiences, they realize their influence has already extended far beyond their immediate community. The couple begins to sense a particular summons toward locations where the gospel needs both establishment and refinement. Their combination of practical abilities and spiritual insight makes them ideal for strengthening existing congregations and planting new ones. This recognition fills them with both excitement and trepidation. Paul's letters arrive periodically, bringing news of his ministry and encouragement for the Corinthian congregation. In one correspondence, he mentions his plans to visit Ephesus and suggests that the couple might discover opportunities there for expanded ministry. This possibility ignites something within their hearts that they cannot disregard. Ephesus represents both difficulty and opportunity. As one of the empire's most significant cities, it offers access to influential individuals and substantial resources. Still, it also harbors profound pagan customs and powerful resistance to Christian truth. The couple acknowledges that their abilities in cross-cultural ministry, developed through years in diverse Corinth, equip them for such difficulties. Their companions in the Corinthian congregation initially resist the concept of their departure. The couple has become so integral to the community's existence that their absence appears inconceivable. Still, mature believers acknowledge that God's work requires mobility and sacrifice. Reluctant blessing gradually replaces initial resistance. Priscilla and Aquila spend weeks in prayer and dialogue, pursuing clarity about their future. They comprehend that abandoning Corinth signifies leaving security for uncertainty. Their enterprise has prospered here. Their residence has become a landmark for believers. Still, the summons to expand their ministry intensifies with each passing day. The couple's partnership deepens as they contemplate this transition. They acknowledge that their combined talents, her intellectual sharpness, and his steady insight create a powerful team for ministry. Their marriage becomes a platform for service that neither could accomplish alone. As they make final preparations for departure, the house congregation assembles for a farewell celebration. The tears that flow reflect not merely sadness at their leaving, but gratitude for the foundation they have supplied. The couple's legacy in Corinth is not a structure or an institution, but a community of believers equipped to continue developing and serving. Their summons has evolved from supporting Paul's ministry to establishing their own. The quiet servants have become recognized leaders. The couple who once fled Rome as refugees now prepare to enter another major city as ambassadors of Christ. Their account demonstrates how God equips his servants through seasons of faithful service before summoning them to greater responsibility. The morning of departure arrives with the same blend of sorrow and anticipation that characterized Paul's leaving. Still, this time, Priscilla and Aquila stand as the ones being sent, their hearts filled with intention and their hands ready for the work ahead. Their voyage toward Ephesus begins with steps of faith into an unknown yet promising future. Voyage to Ephesus. The harbor at Corinth bustles with morning endeavor as traders prepare their merchandise and sailors ready their vessels for departure. Among the crowd, Priscilla and Aquila stand beside their carefully gathered belongings, their faces reflecting both determination and the natural anxiety that accompanies major life transitions. The ship that will transport them to Ephesus rocks gently in the harbor, its wooden hull weathered yet sturdy. Paul joins them at the dock, his presence adding significance to this instant of transition. The three have decided to journey together, their shared destination creating a natural collaboration for the voyage ahead. The apostles' experience with Mediterranean travel supplies comfort as they prepare to navigate waters that can shift from calm to dangerous without warning. Their preparations disclose the careful thought behind this choice. Priscilla has gathered their most essential implements and supplies, acknowledging that founding a new tent-making enterprise will demand immediate productivity. Aquila carries scrolls containing scripture portions and letters from fellow believers, treasures that will assist them to maintain connection with the broader Christian community. The ship's captain, a weathered Greek with eyes that reflect decades of sea experience, receives them aboard with professional courtesy. His vessel regularly transports passengers between major ports, and he acknowledges the value of travelers who bring no difficulty and pay their fare promptly. The couple's quiet dignity and Paul's scholarly bearing identify them as respectable passengers. As Corinth's coastline gradually disappears behind them, the three companions settle into the pattern of sea travel. The Mediterranean stretches endlessly in all directions, its blue surface broken only by occasional dolphins and distant sails. The ship's gentle rocking supplies a peaceful backdrop for dialogue and reflection. Paul employs these quiet hours to equip them for what lies ahead. Ephesus, he clarifies, differs substantially from Corinth in both character and difficulties. While Corinth prospers on commerce and embraces diverse cultures, Ephesus centers its identity around the magnificent temple of Artemis and the religious customs surrounding it. The city's spiritual atmosphere will test their faith in ways they have not yet encountered. The dialogue discloses the depth of relationship that has developed between the three. Paul treats the couple not as followers, but as collaborators in ministry. He pursues their opinions, appreciates their insights, and acknowledges their distinctive talents. This mutual regard strengthens their bond and equips them for the collaborative work ahead. Storms threaten during their second day at sea, dark clouds assembling on the horizon like gathering armies. The ship's crew moves with practiced efficiency, securing loose objects and adjusting sails to manage the changing conditions. Priscilla and Aquila observe these preparations with interest, their tent-making abilities assisting them to comprehend the importance of proper rigging and weatherproofing. The approaching storm supplies Paul with a natural opportunity to communicate stories of his previous sea voyages. His account of shipwrecks and rescues demonstrates God's faithfulness through danger, while also equipping his companions for the realities of apostolic ministry. Adventure and risk intertwine inevitably with disseminating the gospel across the empire. As waves grow larger and the ship's motion becomes more pronounced, the couple realizes that their years of steady labor have equipped them well for travel's physical demands. They experience less seasickness than many passengers, their bodies adapted to the pattern of patient labor. This resilience will serve them well in the difficulties ahead. The storm passes after several tense hours, leaving behind crystal-clear skies and calm seas. The experience bonds the passengers in the way that shared trials always do. Dialogues flow more freely, and the ship's atmosphere becomes more comfortable. The couple discovers opportunities to communicate their faith with fellow travelers, their genuine concern for others, opening natural doors for testimony. Paul witnesses these interactions with satisfaction. He acknowledges that Priscilla and Aquila possess the rare combination of spiritual depth and practical insight that makes them effective cross-cultural ministers. Their capacity to connect with individuals from different backgrounds will prove invaluable in cosmopolitan Ephesus. The third day brings their first glimpse of the Asian coast. Mountains rise from the sea like ancient sentinels, their peaks catching the morning illumination. The ship's course follows the coastline, supplying passengers with views of small fishing villages and terraced hillsides. This new landscape speaks of different cultures and unfamiliar difficulties. Other passengers communicate stories about Ephesus that both excite and concern the couple. The city's wealth and sophistication promise opportunities for their enterprise and ministry. Still, tales of powerful magic practitioners and fierce devotion to Artemis suggest spiritual resistance unlike anything they encountered in Corinth. The couple listens carefully, assembling information that will assist them to navigate their new setting. As they approach Ephesus, the city's magnificence becomes apparent. The harbor facilities surpass anything in Corinth, with massive stone quays and sophisticated loading equipment. Ships from across the empire crowd the port, their flags representing dozens of nations and cultures. The Temple of Artemis dominates the skyline, its marble columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. The couple's first impressions of Ephesus confirm both the opportunities and difficulties they anticipated. The city's obvious prosperity suggests potential clientele for their tent-making enterprise. The diverse population implies openness to new concepts, including Christian instruction. Still, the temple's imposing presence and the religious processions they witness indicate deeply entrenched spiritual customs that will not welcome transformation easily. Paul's familiarity with the city proves invaluable as they navigate the busy streets from the harbor. He guides them through the marketplace, pointing out potential locations for their enterprise and clarifying local customs that will affect their ministry. His knowledge transforms what could have been overwhelming confusion into manageable orientation. The couple discovers temporary lodging in a modest inn near the harbor, their plans requiring several days to locate suitable permanent housing. The inn's diverse clientele supplies immediate opportunities to witness Ephesian culture and begin constructing relationships. Their natural friendliness and genuine interest in others quickly establishes them as welcome guests. Evening brings their first opportunity to investigate the city at leisure. The streets fill with individuals from across the empire, their clothing and languages creating a tapestry of human diversity. Markets stay open late, their stalls illuminated by oil lamps and torches. The couple walks these streets with wonder, acknowledging the incredible ministry potential that such diversity represents. As they settle into their room for the night, Priscilla and Aquila reflect on their voyage's completion. The sea voyage has ended safely, yet their real adventure in Ephesus is just beginning. They sleep peacefully, their hearts filled with anticipation for the work ahead and gratitude for God's faithful protection during their travels. Establishing roots in Ephesus. The morning sun creates extended shadows across Ephesus as Priscilla and Aquila commence their pursuit of a permanent residence. The city awakens with the energy of a major commercial center, traders preparing their stalls, while artisans ready their workshops for another day of productive labor. The couple moves through these busy streets with careful observation, pursuing a location that will serve both their enterprise requirements and their ministry summons. Their pursuit leads them through various neighborhoods, each presenting different advantages and difficulties. The area near the harbor supplies excellent access to traveling traders who need tent repairs and new equipment. However, the constant noise and transient population make it less suitable for the quiet assemblies they hope to establish. The residential districts offer more stability yet less foot traffic for their enterprise. After several days of careful investigation, they uncover a modest structure near the city's main thoroughfare. The structure includes both living quarters and workshop space, its layout perfectly suited to their combined requirements. The location balances accessibility for clientele with the privacy necessary for Christian meetings. The rent, while substantial, remains within their means if their enterprise prospers. Aquila examines the structure with the careful eye of an experienced artisan. The workshop space offers adequate room for their equipment and storage. The living areas supply comfortable accommodations for their family and guests. Most significantly, the main room can accommodate the house congregation assemblies they plan to establish. The structure speaks to their hearts as the right place for this new chapter. Negotiations with the structure's owner disclose the complexity of establishing themselves in a new city. The man, a prosperous trader with interests throughout the province, requires references and guarantees that test their limited connections. Paul's endorsement bears significance, yet the couple must also demonstrate their own credibility and financial stability. Their tent-making abilities prove invaluable in these early days. Information spreads quickly through the artisans' quarter about the Jewish couple who produce exceptional work. Their reputation for quality and reliability established in Corinth begins to rebuild in Ephesus. Clientele arrive with repairs and orders, supplying both income and opportunities for relationship construction. The couple's workshop becomes a natural assembly place for individuals from diverse backgrounds. Roman soldiers need equipment maintained. Merchant traders require canvas merchandise for their voyages. Local artisans pursue advice on techniques and supplies. These daily interactions create a web of relationships that will support both their enterprise and their ministry. Priscilla's education and cultural sensitivity assist her to navigate the intricate social dynamics of Ephesian civilization. She comprehends how to communicate respectfully with upper-class Roman women while remaining approachable to working-class wives. Her insight in managing these relationships protects the couple from social missteps that could damage their reputation and ministry opportunities. Their first Christian assembly in the new location brings both excitement and nervousness. The group remains small, Paul, a few believers they encountered at the harbor, and several contacts made through their enterprise. Still, the assembly establishes a foundation that will support future development. The couple's natural hospitality creates an atmosphere where strangers quickly become companions. The spiritual climate of Ephesus presents distinctive difficulties for their ministry. The Temple of Artemis influences every aspect of city existence, from commerce to politics to social relationships. Many residents perceive religious innovation with suspicion, fearing it might anger their patron goddess. The couple must navigate these sensitivities while remaining faithful to their Christian convictions. Their method emphasizes relationship construction over confrontation. Rather than directly challenging pagan practices, they concentrate on demonstrating Christian love through practical service. Their enterprise reputation for honesty and quality becomes a testimony to their faith's reality. Individuals witness their peaceful marriage and generous hospitality, acknowledging something different about this Jewish couple. The couple's residence begins to develop its own pattern of existence and ministry. Morning hours concentrate on enterprise endeavors, with clientele receiving careful attention to their requirements. Afternoon brings opportunities for deeper dialogues as relationships develop. Evening assemblies supply space for worship, instruction, and mutual encouragement among believers. Paul's presence during these early months supplies stability and encouragement. His instructional ministry in the synagogue and public settings creates opportunities for the couple to encounter potential converts. His apostolic authority opens doors that might otherwise remain closed. Still, he also acknowledges their increasing independence and leadership capabilities. The couple confronts practical difficulties in adapting to Ephesian customs and expectations. Food preparation differs from what they knew in Corinth. Enterprise practices require adjustment to local standards. Social relationships involve intricate protocols that require time to master. Each adjustment represents a learning opportunity that strengthens their effectiveness. Their workshop becomes a training ground for young believers interested in practical abilities. Aquila instructs tent-making techniques while communicating spiritual insight. Priscilla offers guidance on household management and women's concerns. These mentoring relationships multiply their influence beyond what structured instruction alone could accomplish. Resistance begins to surface as their influence expands. Some Jewish residents question their association with Paul's controversial instruction. Certain traders worry about economic implications if Christian faith spreads widely. Temple administrators monitor their endeavors with increasing concern. The couple responds to these difficulties with grace and insight, avoiding unnecessary confrontation while maintaining their convictions. The house congregation gradually expands as new believers join the community. Each edition brings its own account of transformation and its own talents for service. The couple's leadership approach emphasizes participation and shared responsibility rather than authoritarian control. This method develops strong believers who can ultimately guide their own house congregations. Their enterprise effectiveness supplies resources for expanding ministry endeavors. They can afford to host meals for larger groups. They purchase additional oil lamps and seating for their assemblies. They contribute to the support of traveling ministers and local believers facing financial struggles. Prosperity becomes an implement for kingdom advancement rather than personal enrichment. As their first year in Ephesus draws to a close, Priscilla and Aquila reflect on the foundation they have established. Their enterprise prospers in ways that exceed their initial expectations. Their residence has become a recognized center for Christian fellowship. Their influence extends throughout the city's artisan community. Most significantly, they have successfully planted roots in soil that will produce lasting fruit for God's kingdom. The couple acknowledges that their work in Ephesus is just beginning. The difficulties they confront will likely intensify as their influence expands. Still, they also perceive abundant opportunities for ministry that could transform this strategic city. Their roots have taken hold in Ephesian soil, and they are ready for whatever development the future might bring. Apollos enters the account. The marketplace buzzes with unusual excitement as information spreads about a compelling new instructor who has arrived in Ephesus. Traders abandon their stalls to listen. Artisans pause their work to hear his words. Even Roman administrators take notice of the crowds assembling around this eloquent speaker from Alexandria. His name is Apollos, and his presence creates ripples throughout the city's spiritual landscape. Priscilla first encounters him near the harbor, where he addresses a growing crowd of Jews and God-fearing Gentiles. His voice carries across the plaza with remarkable clarity, each word carefully selected for maximum impact. His knowledge of Scripture appears vast, his capacity to weave together passages from different books demonstrating years of careful study. The crowd listens with rapt attention, many nodding in agreement with his interpretations. Aquila joins his wife at the edge of the crowd, his artisan's eye immediately acknowledging the quality of Apollos' presentation. The young man's passion burns brightly, his love for God evident in every gesture and expression. His instruction about the promised Messiah resonates with Jewish listeners who have longed for such clarity. Still, something in his teaching catches Aquila's attention, a gap that only someone well-versed in Christian instruction would notice. Apollos speaks eloquently about Jesus as the Messiah, his arguments from Scripture compelling and well-reasoned. He demonstrates how the prophecies discover fulfillment in Christ's existence and ministry. His knowledge of Jesus' teachings suggests extensive study of available accounts. Still, his comprehension appears to stop at John the Baptist's baptism, missing the deeper significance of Jesus' death and resurrection. The couple exchanges glances that communicate volumes about their shared recognition. Apollos possesses extraordinary talents that could advance God's kingdom substantially. His education in Alexandria has equipped him with rhetorical abilities that surpass those of most Christian instructors. His sincere faith and passionate delivery capture hearts and minds. Still, his incomplete comprehension could mislead sincere seekers and confuse new believers. After Apollos concludes his instruction, small groups assemble around him with questions and comments. His responses disclose both his strengths and limitations. He responds to questions about Old Testament prophecy with remarkable insight. He clarifies intricate theological ideas with clarity that assists ordinary individuals to comprehend. Still, when someone asks about Christian baptism, his response lacks the depth that comes from comprehending Christ's complete work. Priscilla and Aquila approach him with careful consideration. They acknowledge that correcting an instructor of his caliber requires insight and humility. Their goal is not to embarrass him publicly, but to assist him to develop his already impressive talents. They introduce themselves as fellow believers and tentmakers, establishing common ground that will support deeper dialogue. Apollos receives their introduction with warmth and interest. His genuine humility, despite his obvious talents, immediately endears him to the couple. He expresses gratitude for their hospitality and shows genuine interest in their own ministry experiences. This openness to fellowship creates the foundation for the relationship that will follow. The couple invites Apollos to their residence for a meal, an invitation he accepts with enthusiasm. The possibility of fellowship with established believers appeals to him, especially given his recent arrival in the city. He acknowledges that local knowledge and connections will enhance his ministry effectiveness. Their invitation represents both hospitality and opportunity. Their first extended dialogue discloses the depth of Apollos' scholarship and the sincerity of his faith. He communicates accounts of his education in Alexandria, describing the vast library and the intellectual atmosphere that shaped his thinking. His voyage to faith commenced through careful study of Scripture, leading to conviction about Jesus' identity as the promised Messiah. His choice to journey and instruct reflects his desire to communicate this conviction with others. The couple listens carefully, asking questions that assist them to comprehend both his strengths and the areas where additional instruction might prove helpful. They avoid any hint of criticism, instead expressing appreciation for his dedication and obvious talents. Their method demonstrates insight gained through years of ministry experience and their natural capacity to encourage while guiding. As their dialogue proceeds, Apollos starts to acknowledge that his hosts possess knowledge and experience that could enhance his own ministry. He observes references to aspects of Christian instruction unfamiliar to him. Their casual mentions of baptism in Jesus' name and the Holy Spirit's work suggest depths of comprehension he has not yet investigated. His intellectual curiosity and spiritual hunger make him eager to absorb more. The couple's workshop supplies a natural environment for continued dialogue. As they labor together on various projects, conversation flows naturally between practical concerns and spiritual matters. Apollos proves helpful with their enterprise, his educated background enabling him to assist with correspondence and customer relations. This practical collaboration strengthens their developing friendship. Their neighbors start to observe the frequent presence of the eloquent instructor at the tentmaker's residence. Some wonder about the nature of their relationship, particularly given Apollos' expanding reputation throughout the city. The couple's natural discretion protects Apollos' reputation while allowing their friendship to develop naturally. They comprehend that public perception can either enhance or hinder ministry effectiveness. Apollos' instruction continues to draw crowds, yet careful listeners start to observe subtle transformations in his teaching. His clarifications of certain passages become more nuanced. His references to Jesus' work expand beyond the material he initially presented. These transformations reflect the influence of his dialogues with Priscilla and Aquila, though they occur gradually and naturally rather than through dramatic shifts. The couple witnesses these developments with quiet contentment. They acknowledge that Apollos' talents, properly cultivated, could substantially impact cities throughout the empire. His combination of intellectual capacity and passionate faith makes him ideally suited for ministry in sophisticated urban centers. Their position in his development represents an investment in future ministry that extends far beyond Ephesus. Local synagogue authorities start to take notice of Apollos' evolving instruction. Some appreciate the depth and clarity he brings to scripture interpretation. Others express concern about fresh emphases in his teaching. The couple assists him to navigate these political realities, communicating insights gained from their own encounters with religious resistance. As weeks progress, Apollos becomes a regular presence in their residence and workshop. His friendship with the couple deepens based on mutual regard and shared dedication to ministry. He appreciates their wisdom and experience while they value his talents and enthusiasm. This relationship becomes an example for how established believers can mentor emerging leaders. The stage is prepared for a more intentional instructional relationship. Apollos' hunger for deeper comprehension encounters the couple's wisdom and experience. His talents await full cultivation, while their guidance offers the missing elements his ministry requires. The foundation has been established for a collaboration that will transform both Apollos' effectiveness and the broader Christian assignment throughout the empire. Instructing Apollos. The evening atmosphere carries the fragrance of oil lamps and cooking fires as Priscilla and Aquila prepare their residence for what they sense will be a significant dialogue. Apollos has accepted their invitation for a more extended discussion about faith and ministry, his eagerness to absorb, evident in his early arrival. The couple has prayed extensively about this opportunity, acknowledging both its potential and its delicate nature. They commence by communicating their own voyage of faith, describing how their relationship with Paul deepened their comprehension of Christ's work. Their personal testimonies create a foundation of trust and demonstrate that learning continues throughout existence. Even experienced believers like themselves have developed through relationships with other faithful instructors. This method assists Apollos to comprehend that additional learning represents development rather than inadequacy. The dialogue naturally turns to the nature of Christian baptism, a topic where Apollos' comprehension shows clear gaps. Priscilla gently clarifies the difference between John's baptism of repentance and Christian baptism into Christ's death and resurrection. Her words carry authority, born of experience rather than mere academic knowledge. She has witnessed countless baptisms and comprehends their transformative influence in believers' existences. Aquila supports his wife's instruction with practical examples from their ministry in Corinth. He describes how new believers experience dramatic transformations through baptism in Jesus' name. These accounts illustrate theological ideas with real-life examples that make abstract truths tangible. His calm delivery and obvious sincerity assist Apollos to receive this new comprehension without feeling defensive. The couple carefully clarifies the Holy Spirit's position in Christian experience, territory largely unfamiliar to Apollos, despite his extensive education. They describe how the Spirit empowers believers for service, supplies comfort during trials, and guides choices about ministry directions. Their clarification combines scriptural references with personal encounters that demonstrate the Spirit's practical reality. Apollos listens with the intensity of a scholar discovering fresh truth. His questions disclose both his intellectual capacity and his spiritual hunger. He asks about the relationship between Jesus' resurrection and believers' spiritual experience. He pursues clarification about the Spirit's work in individual existences versus his position in the broader Christian community. Each question demonstrates his desire to comprehend rather than merely accumulate information. The instructional session extends through the evening as ideas build upon each other. The couple clarifies how Christ's death accomplished what temple sacrifices could only symbolize. They describe the resurrection's significance for both Jesus' vindication and believers' future hope. Their presentation weaves together themes that Apollos had comprehended separately but never perceived as an integrated whole. Priscilla addresses the implications of Jesus' completed work for Gentile inclusion in God's people. Her clarification assists Apollos to comprehend why the Christian teaching appeals to non-Jews without requiring circumcision or full adherence to Mosaic law. This insight will prove essential for his future ministry in cities with large Gentile populations. The couple's collaboration in instruction demonstrates the principle they're clarifying. Their complementary talents, her intellectual precision, and his pastoral warmth create a learning environment that addresses both mind and heart. Apollos witnesses how their marriage serves their ministry, supplying an example for how personal relationships can enhance spiritual effectiveness. As the night deepens, Apollos starts to grasp the full scope of Christian instruction. The elements of his previous comprehension reorganize into a more complete picture. His excitement increases as he acknowledges how this fuller comprehension will transform his ministry. The passion that characterized his previous instruction now has a more solid foundation and broader scope. The couple addresses practical implications of these theological insights. They clarify how Christian communities function differently from synagogue congregations. They describe the position of spiritual talents in congregation existence and the importance of mutual edification. Their instruction prepares Apollos for the realities of Christian ministry, rather than merely correcting theological gaps. Apollos' questions become more sophisticated as his comprehension deepens. He asks about the relationship between faith and works, the nature of Christian freedom, and the position of suffering in spiritual development. These inquiries demonstrate that he's not merely accepting fresh information, but integrating it into a coherent worldview that will guide his future ministry. The couple communicates insights about cross-cultural ministry, drawing from their encounters in both Corinth and Ephesus. They assist Apollos to comprehend how the gospel teaching adapts to different cultural contexts without losing its essential character. This wisdom will prove invaluable as he considers ministry opportunities in various cities across the empire. As dawn approaches, the instructional session reaches its natural conclusion. Apollos expresses profound gratitude for the couple's patience and wisdom. His humble response demonstrates the character that makes him such an effective instructor. He acknowledges that his talents have been enhanced rather than diminished by this encounter. The couple extends an invitation for Apollos to continue absorbing through ongoing fellowship. They comprehend that transformation requires time and that one evening cannot address every question or implication. Their offer of continued relationship reflects their dedication to cultivating emerging leaders rather than merely correcting errors. Apollos accepts their invitation with enthusiasm, acknowledging that his friendship with this couple represents an invaluable resource for his ministry cultivation. He expresses particular appreciation for their gentle method and the regard they showed for his existing knowledge. Their instructional approach has supplied an example for how he can correct and instruct others in the future. The evening's dialogue marks a pivotal moment in Apollos' ministry preparation. His comprehension of Christian instruction has gained depth and breadth that will dramatically enhance his effectiveness. The couple's investment in his cultivation represents a multiplication of their own influence that will extend throughout the empire as Apollos travels and instructs. Information about this intensive instructional session remains private, yet its effects will soon become evident in Apollos' public ministry. His future preaching will reflect the fuller comprehension he has gained. His capacity to respond to questions and address concerns will demonstrate the solid foundation this instruction has supplied. The couple's quiet investment in his cultivation will produce fruit that extends far beyond what they could accomplish through their own direct ministry. The relationship between Priscilla, Aquila, and Apollos illustrates the power of personal mentorship in cultivating Christian leaders. Their willingness to invest time and wisdom in a promising young instructor demonstrates the multiplication principle that drives effective ministry. One evening of careful instruction will influence countless existences as Apollos applies what he has absorbed in cities throughout the Roman world. Apollos' transformation. The morning sun illuminates the synagogue courtyard as Apollos prepares for his first instructional session since his extended dialogue with Priscilla and Aquila. The crowd that assembles reflects his expanding reputation throughout Ephesus. Merchants, artisans, Roman citizens, and curious seekers, all attracted by reports of his eloquence and wisdom. Still, those who listen carefully will observe something different about his teaching today. His opening words carry the same passionate conviction that characterized his earlier instruction, yet his content discloses fresh depths of comprehension. Where once he spoke primarily about Jesus as the promised Messiah, he now clarifies the complete work of Christ's death and resurrection. His description of salvation becomes more personal and immediate, touching hearts in ways his previous instruction never accomplished. The transformation in his teaching reflects the inner transformation that has occurred through his friendship with the tent-making couple. Apollos now speaks with the authority of someone who has grasped not merely the intellectual framework of Christian faith, but its living reality. His references to the Holy Spirit's work carry conviction born of personal experience rather than mere academic knowledge. Several listeners approach him after his instruction with questions that disclose their deeper engagement. A Roman trader asks about the nature of Christian baptism, having heard conflicting clarifications from various instructors. Apollos responds with clarity and precision, clarifying the difference between John's baptism and the fuller Christian experience. His response demonstrates the practical value of his enhanced comprehension. The couple witnesses these developments with quiet contentment from their position at the edge of the crowd. They acknowledge that their investment in Apollos's cultivation is already producing fruit. His improved instruction will influence everyone who hears him, creating ripple effects that extend far beyond their immediate community. Their position in his transformation represents ministry multiplication at its finest. Information about Apollos's enhanced instruction spreads quickly through Ephesus's Christian community. Believers who heard his earlier teachings observed the difference immediately. His clarifications of Scripture now connect themes that previously seemed separate. His responses to difficult questions disclose depth that wasn't apparent before. The transformation confirms the wisdom of the couple's gentle intervention. The young instructor's reputation extends beyond the local Christian community to the broader population of Ephesus. His combination of intellectual rigor and spiritual passion appeals to educated Greeks who appreciate logical argumentation. His sincere faith and obvious integrity attract seekers who have grown skeptical of empty religious rhetoric. His transformed teaching reaches hearts that previous versions couldn't touch. Apollos starts to express interest in journeying to other cities where his enhanced comprehension might benefit Christian communities. His dialogues with Priscilla and Aquila about their encounters in Corinth have sparked curiosity about ministry opportunities elsewhere. The couple encourages this interest, acknowledging that his talents deserve a larger platform than Ephesus alone can supply. The choice to recommend Apollos for ministry in Corinth surfaces naturally from these dialogues. Paul's former companions comprehend the requirements of that Christian community and acknowledge how Apollos' talents could address them. His eloquence and educational background make him particularly suited for ministry in a sophisticated city like Corinth. Their recommendation carries significance because of their established credibility. The couple writes letters of introduction for Apollos, describing his character and qualifications to believers in Corinth. Their endorsement emphasizes both his natural talents and his transformed comprehension of Christian truth. They clarify how his ministry could complement Paul's previous work rather than competing with it. Their careful wording reflects wisdom gained through years of ministry experience. Apollos' preparation for departure includes intensive dialogues with the couple about the specific difficulties he will encounter in Corinth. They describe the city's cultural climate, the composition of its Christian community, and the particular issues that have troubled believers there. This briefing assists him to prepare for ministry in a context quite different from Ephesus. The couple communicates practical advice about establishing credibility in a new city. They clarify how their tent-making enterprise assisted them to construct relationships and support their ministry. While Apollos lacks their specific trade abilities, his educational background and instructional capacity supply different yet equally valuable resources for establishing himself in Corinth. Their farewell assembly brings together the entire Ephesian Christian community to commission Apollos for his expanded ministry. The couple's public endorsement of his character and instruction supplies official validation of his transformation. Their words carry particular significance because everyone acknowledges their position in his cultivation. Apollos expresses profound gratitude for the couple's investment in his ministry. His public acknowledgement of their influence demonstrates the humility that makes him such an effective instructor. He acknowledges that his enhanced comprehension results from their willingness to communicate their wisdom and experience. This gratitude will influence his own method to mentoring future leaders. The young instructor's departure from Ephesus marks the beginning of a ministry that will influence Christian communities throughout the empire. His transformed comprehension of Christian truth, cultivated through the couple's patient instruction, will shape his preaching in city after city. The investment of one evening's intensive instruction will produce fruit in locations Priscilla and Aquila will never visit personally. Reports from Corinth soon confirm the wisdom of their recommendation. Apollos' ministry there strengthens the congregation in ways that complement Paul's previous work. His eloquent preaching attracts fresh converts, while his solid instruction grounds existing believers in their faith. The transformation that commenced in their Ephesian residence continues to unfold in another city. The couple's position in Apollos' cultivation illustrates the power of personal mentorship in Christian ministry. Their willingness to invest time and wisdom in a promising young instructor demonstrates how established believers can multiply their influence through others. One carefully instructed leader can ultimately reach more individuals than years of personal ministry might touch. Their method to correcting Apollos supplies an example for how mature Christians should address incomplete comprehension in others. Their gentle spirit and respectful manner preserved his dignity while enhancing his effectiveness. Their approach demonstrates that correction can strengthen rather than discourage when delivered with love and wisdom. The transformation of Apollos represents one of the couple's most significant contributions to Christian ministry. Their investment in his cultivation will produce fruit for generations as he influences other instructors and leaders. The young man who arrived in Ephesus with impressive talents, yet incomplete comprehension, has become a powerful force for advancing the gospel throughout the empire. Years later, when Paul writes to the Corinthians about Apollos' ministry, he acknowledges the valuable work this instructor has accomplished. The apostle acknowledges that Apollos' effectiveness results partly from the foundation established by Priscilla and Aquila's careful instruction. Their behind-the-scenes investment in his cultivation has contributed to Christianity's expansion throughout the Roman world. The couple's work with Apollos demonstrates that effective ministry frequently involves acknowledging and cultivating the talents of others. Their willingness to perceive potential in a young instructor and invest in his cultivation created opportunities for influence that extended far beyond their immediate context. Their example encourages other believers to pursue similar opportunities to multiply their ministry through mentorship and guidance. Difficulties in Ephesus. The morning brings information that sends ripples of concern through Ephesus's Christian community. A silversmith named Demetrius has commenced organizing his fellow artisans. Their anger concentrated on the expanding influence of Christian instruction throughout the city. His workshop has become an assembly place for those whose livelihoods depend on the Temple of Artemis and the religious tourism it generates. Priscilla and Aquila receive this information through their own network of artisan contacts, men who regard their craftsmanship yet worry about the implications of their faith. The couple's position in the city's enterprise community supplies them with early warning of developing resistance. Their clientele speak freely about concerns that other Christians might not hear until crisis arrives. The economic dimensions of the conflict become clear as more details surface. Demetrius and his associates produce silver shrines and religious artifacts that pilgrims purchase during their visits to Artemis's temple. Christian instruction about the emptiness of idols directly threatens their market. Their resistance stems from financial concerns as much as religious conviction. The couple acknowledges that their own enterprise encounters potential difficulties as the conflict intensifies. Their reputation for quality work has protected them thus far, yet religious tensions can override enterprise relationships. They commence preparing for the possibility that their income might suffer as resistance to Christianity expands throughout the city. Paul's bold preaching in the lecture hall of Tyrannus has accelerated the confrontation. His daily instruction reaches expanding numbers of individuals, including some who abandon their magical practices and burn expensive scrolls publicly. These dramatic conversions demonstrate Christianity's power, yet also threaten established religious and economic interests. The couple's workshop becomes a location where believers assemble to discuss the expanding tension. Their central location and established reputation make their residence a natural meeting point for concerned Christians. These dialogues assist the community to comprehend the nature of the resistance they encounter and coordinate their response to increasing pressure. Local Jewish authorities discover themselves in an awkward position as the conflict develops. While many disagree with Christian instruction, they also acknowledge that persecution of Christians could easily extend to the broader Jewish community. The couple's relationships within the Jewish community assist them to comprehend these intricate dynamics and navigate them wisely. The couple encounters pressure from both sides as the situation deteriorates. Some Christians urge them to take stronger public stands against pagan practices. Certain enterprise associates suggest they distance themselves from Paul's controversial instruction. Their response demonstrates the wisdom that comes from years of experience in similar situations. Their method emphasizes consistency and integrity rather than dramatic demonstrations. They continue their enterprise practices with the same honesty and quality that constructed their reputation. They maintain their Christian convictions without unnecessarily provoking confrontation. This steady witness proves more effective than aggressive evangelism in winning regard from their neighbors. The couple's house congregation encounters particular difficulties as resistance intensifies. Regular assemblies become more difficult as members worry about being identified as Christians. The couple must weigh their desire to maintain fellowship with legitimate concerns about safety. Their leadership during this period assists the community to navigate unprecedented difficulties. Roman authorities start to take notice of the religious tensions affecting their city. Administrators, who previously disregarded Christian endeavors, now perceive them as potential threats to public order. The couple's comprehension of Roman administrative procedures assists them to advise other believers about legal realities and appropriate responses to official inquiries. The couple's network of enterprise relationships supplies valuable intelligence about developing resistance. They absorb which traders have joined Demetrius's coalition and which remain neutral. This information assists them to protect vulnerable believers and prepare for potential boycotts of Christian enterprises. Their workshop becomes a testing ground for their faith. As economic pressure increases, some clientele start to avoid their services, while others continue their patronage, yet express concerns about the couple's religious associations. Each enterprise interaction requires wisdom to maintain integrity while preserving relationships. The couple's marriage encounters fresh stresses as external pressures mount. The uncertainty about their future in Ephesus creates tension that affects their daily existence. Still, their collaboration proves strong enough to manage these difficulties, their shared faith supplying stability during uncertain times. Their correspondence with Christians in other cities discloses that resistance to Christianity is expanding throughout the empire. Letters from Corinth and Rome describe similar difficulties encountered by believers elsewhere. This broader perspective assists them to comprehend that their difficulties in Ephesus reflect empire-wide trends rather than merely local problems. The couple commences making contingency plans for possible departure from Ephesus. Their experience as refugees from Rome has instructed them about the importance of preparation for sudden transformation. They organize their enterprise affairs and personal belongings in ways that would facilitate quick departure if necessary. Their relationship with Paul becomes more intricate as he surfaces as the primary target of resistance. The couple's association with him creates risks for their enterprise and personal safety. Still, their loyalty to their companion and ministry collaborator prevents them from distancing themselves despite the potential costs. The couple's response to these difficulties demonstrates the character that has made them effective ministers. They refuse to abandon their convictions, despite pressure from multiple directions. Their steadfast dedication to both their faith and their relationships supplies stability for other believers encountering similar difficulties. Local Christians look to the couple for leadership during this crisis. Their experience with persecution in Rome and their established reputation in Ephesus make them natural advisors for the community. Their counsel emphasizes patience, wisdom, and trust in God's providence rather than panic or aggressive response. The couple's workshop continues to operate despite the difficulties, supplying both income and ministry opportunities. Their dedication to maintaining their enterprise demonstrates faith in God's provision and concern for their employees' welfare. This persistence becomes a testimony to their neighbors about the stability that Christian faith supplies. Their house congregation adapts to the changing circumstances with creative solutions that maintain fellowship while reducing visibility. Smaller assemblies replace large meetings. Prayer becomes more frequent and urgent. The community's response to crisis discloses the strength of foundations established during peaceful times. The couple's influence extends beyond their immediate community to other house congregations throughout Ephesus. Their wisdom and experience assist multiple congregations to navigate the difficulties of operating under increased scrutiny. Their leadership multiplies their impact during this critical period. As the crisis deepens, the couple's preparation and character position them to play essential positions in the dramatic events that will soon unfold. Their established relationships, enterprise network, and spiritual maturity make them valuable resources for the Christian community. The difficulties they encounter test their faith while preparing them for even greater trials ahead. Paul's return to Ephesus. The familiar figure appears at the harbor just as traders commence their morning endeavors. Paul's weathered face and travel-worn clothing identify him as someone who has voyaged far, yet his purposeful stride suggests urgent business rather than leisurely travel. Information about his arrival spreads quickly through the Christian community, bringing both excitement and concern to those who comprehend the dangerous climate he has entered. Priscilla spots him first from their workshop window, her sharp eyes acknowledging his distinctive silhouette despite the months of separation. She calls to Aquila, who immediately sets aside his work to join her observation. The couple exchanges glances that communicate their shared blend of joy at his return and worry about his timing. The situation in Ephesus has grown increasingly volatile since his departure. Their reunion occurs in the relative privacy of their workshop, away from the curious eyes of neighbors and potential opponents. Paul's embrace carries the warmth of profound friendship mixed with the urgency of someone who has received troubling reports. His first questions concentrate on the welfare of the Christian community and the specific difficulties they have encountered during his absence. The couple supplies a detailed briefing about the developing resistance led by Demetrius and his fellow artisans. They describe the economic pressures affecting Christian enterprises and the expanding tensions between different religious groups. Their report assists Paul to comprehend the intricate dynamics he must navigate during his return visit. Paul's response discloses both his characteristic boldness and his expanding wisdom about when to advance and when to exercise restraint. He expresses concern about the believer's welfare while also acknowledging the strategic importance of maintaining a Christian presence in such an essential city. His questions demonstrate careful thought about how to proceed effectively. The couple communicates their observations about transformations in the broader community since Paul's departure. Apollos' ministry has left a positive impression on many residents, while the dramatic book, Burning by Converted Magicians, has created lasting discussion throughout the city. These developments have raised Christianity's profile in ways that bring both opportunities and dangers. Their dialogue discloses the depth of friendship that has developed between Paul and the couple. He pursues their counsel about strategy and timing, acknowledging their intimate knowledge of local conditions. They offer advice based on their established relationships and enterprise connections throughout the city. This collaboration demonstrates the mutual regard that characterizes their collaboration. Paul's choice to resume instruction in the lecture hall of Tyrannus surprises some believers who expected him to adopt a lower profile. The couple comprehends his reasoning retreat might encourage opponents while demonstrating weakness to potential converts. Their support for his bold method assists other believers to accept what initially appears like an unnecessarily risky strategy. The couple's workshop becomes an unofficial headquarters for coordinating Paul's ministry endeavors. Their central location and established reputation make their residence a natural assembly place for planning and communication. The constant stream of visitors demonstrates the couple's essential position in supporting Paul's work. Their enterprise relationships supply valuable intelligence about the resistance's plans and strategies. Clientele, who remain friendly despite religious differences, occasionally communicate information about Demetrius's endeavors. This network provides the Christian community advanced warning about potential threats and opportunities to prepare appropriate responses. The couple's experience with persecution in Rome proves invaluable as they assist Paul to comprehend the Roman administrative system in Ephesus. Their knowledge of legal procedures and official protocols assists him to avoid unnecessary confrontation with authorities while maintaining his ministry effectiveness. This wisdom protects both Paul and the broader Christian community. Paul's preaching attracts even larger crowds than before, partly because of curiosity about his return despite obvious dangers. The couple witnesses these assemblies with mixed emotions, joy at the gospel's reception and concern about the attention such effectiveness generates. Their position becomes increasingly important as intermediaries between Paul and the community. The couple's house congregation continues to meet despite the tense atmosphere, supplying a refuge where believers can express their concerns and receive encouragement. Paul's presence at these assemblies strengthens the community's determination, while his instruction addresses specific fears and difficulties they encounter. Their workshop becomes a location where Paul can continue his tent making alongside his preaching ministry. The familiar pattern of manual labor supplies him with emotional equilibrium during intense spiritual warfare. The couple's collaboration in both work and ministry demonstrates the integration of faith and daily existence that characterizes authentic Christianity. The couple starts to sense that Paul's return to Ephesus may be briefer than originally planned. His restlessness and frequent references to other ministry opportunities suggest that he perceives this visit as a necessary yet temporary engagement. They prepare themselves emotionally for another eventual separation while maximizing their collaboration during his presence. Local resistance leaders take notice of Paul's return, adjusting their strategies to account for his renewed influence. The couple's intelligence network discloses increased coordination among Paul's opponents and more sophisticated plans for disrupting his ministry. This information assists the Christian community to prepare for escalating confrontation. The couple's marriage demonstrates remarkable stability during this stressful period. Their shared ministry responsibilities and mutual support supply a foundation that withstands external pressures. Their collaboration becomes an example for other Christian couples encountering similar difficulties in their own relationships and ministry contexts. Their correspondence with Christians in other cities discloses that Paul's return to Ephesus has attracted attention throughout the empire. Letters from Corinth and Rome express both admiration for his boldness and concern about his safety. These connections supply the couple with broader perspective on the significance of current events. The couple's position in supporting Paul's ministry extends beyond practical assistance to emotional and spiritual encouragement. Their friendship supplies him with the personal support necessary for effective ministry under difficult circumstances. Their presence reminds him that he is not alone in encountering the difficulties ahead. As Paul's ministry in Ephesus intensifies, the couple prepares for whatever consequences may follow. Their experience with sudden transformation and forced departure has instructed them about the importance of flexibility and trust in God's providence. They stand ready to support Paul through whatever trials may arrive while maintaining their own ministry effectiveness. The reunion of Paul with Priscilla and Aquila represents more than personal friendship. It demonstrates the power of sustained relationships in Christian ministry. Their collaboration has weathered separation and danger, expanding stronger through shared difficulties. This bond will prove essential as they encounter the dramatic events that will soon test their faith and friendship to its limits. The riot in Ephesus. The morning commences with an unusual tension hanging over the city like storm clouds assembling on the horizon. In the silversmith quarter, Demetrius addresses an ever-growing crowd of artisans, his voice carrying the urgency of someone whose livelihood encounters direct threat. His words fall on receptive ears, as men who have invested their existences in creating religious artifacts witness their market disappearing before their eyes. From their workshop, Priscilla and Aquila can hear the distant sound of angry voices expanding louder with each passing hour. Their network of enterprise contacts has warned them that something substantial is developing, yet the speed of events catches even experienced observers off guard. The couple's first concern concentrates on Paul's safety, knowing that resistance leaders perceive him as the primary source of their troubles. The crowd's movement through the streets creates a sense of impending crisis that affects everyone in the city. Traders commence closing their establishments early. Families gather their children indoors. Roman administrators send messengers to assess the situation's seriousness. The couple acknowledges these signs from their experience in Rome, where similar tensions preceded serious persecution. Information reaches their workshop that the crowd has seized two of Paul's traveling companions, Gaius and Aristarchus. The news sends waves of fear through the Christian community as believers realize that the resistance has moved beyond words to direct action. The couple's residence becomes an assembly place for urgent planning and prayer. Paul's immediate response demonstrates both his courage and his concern for his companions. He desires to enter the theater where the crowd has assembled, despite the obvious danger such action would create. The couple joins other believers in restraining him, their arguments based on practical wisdom rather than cowardice. They comprehend that his presence would likely inflame the situation further. The couple's position in the city's enterprise community supplies them with distinctive insights into the crowd's composition and motivations. They acknowledge that many participants have been swept up in mob psychology rather than holding profound personal grievances. This comprehension assists them to advise other believers about how to respond to the crisis. Their workshop becomes a communication center, as Christians throughout the city pursue information and guidance. The couple's established reputation and central location make their residence a natural assembly point during the emergency. Their calm leadership assists to prevent panic from spreading through the Christian community. The theater fills with individuals who have joined the crowd without fully comprehending the issues involved. The couple's enterprise contacts report that many participants cannot even clarify why they have assembled. This confusion creates opportunities for the situation to spiral out of control in unpredictable ways. Roman authorities encounter a delicate equilibrium between maintaining order and avoiding unnecessary confrontation with the crowd. The couple's comprehension of Roman administrative procedures assists them to interpret official responses and predict likely outcomes. Their knowledge proves valuable for preparing the Christian community for various scenarios. The couple's prayers during this crisis reflect their profound concern for their companion's safety and their comprehension of the broader implications for Christianity in Ephesus. They acknowledge that the events unfolding could determine whether the Christian community can continue functioning openly in the city. Their intercession demonstrates the spiritual warfare underlying the visible conflict. Alexander, a Jewish speaker, attempts to address the crowd, yet encounters immediate hostility from participants who perceive all non-pagans as threats to their traditional way of existence. The couple witnesses this development with concern, acknowledging that anti-Christian sentiment could easily extend to the broader Jewish community. Their own position as Jewish Christians makes them particularly vulnerable. The crowd's chant of "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians" continues for hours, creating an atmosphere of religious frenzy that makes rational discussion impossible. The couple's workshop vibrates with the sound of thousands of voices proclaiming devotion to the goddess. This demonstration of pagan dedication discloses the spiritual forces underlying the economic concerns. The couple's house congregation assembles for urgent prayer as the crisis continues throughout the day. Their intercession concentrates on protection for Paul and his companions, wisdom for Roman administrators, and peace for the city. The assembly demonstrates the Christian community's unity in encountering external threats. The city clerk's eventual intervention supplies a masterful demonstration of political wisdom that diffuses the situation without bloodshed. The couple observes his speech with admiration, acknowledging the abilities required to calm such a volatile crowd. His arguments address both legal realities and practical concerns in ways that supply face-saving opportunities for all parties. The clerk's reference to proper legal procedures offers protection for Christians while acknowledging the artisan's right to pursue their grievances through appropriate channels. The couple comprehends the implications of this method it supplies, breathing room for the Christian community while warning opponents about the limits of acceptable action. As the crowd disperses, the couple's workshop becomes a debriefing center where believers can process the day's events and plan their response. Their guidance assists the community to comprehend what has occurred and prepare for future difficulties. The crisis has disclosed both the resistance's strength and its limitations. The couple's position in protecting Paul during the riot demonstrates their courage and wisdom. Their arguments for restraint probably saved his existence while preserving his ministry effectiveness. Their leadership during the crisis strengthens their position within the Christian community and demonstrates the value of experienced guidance. The riot's aftermath brings both relief and recognition that the underlying tensions remain unresolved. The couple comprehends that while immediate danger has passed, the economic and religious concerns that sparked the conflict continue to threaten the Christian community. Their experience positions them to assist believers to navigate the ongoing difficulties. The couple's enterprise relationships survive the crisis, largely intact testimony to the regard they have earned through years of honest dealings. While some clientele express concerns about their religious associations, most continue their patronage based on the couple's established reputation. This stability supplies resources for continued ministry. The riot's resolution demonstrates God's providence in protecting his people while permitting them to continue their assignment. The couple's prayers have been answered in ways that preserve both individual safety and ministry opportunities. Their faith has been strengthened through witnessing divine intervention in desperate circumstances. Paul's choice to depart Ephesus soon after the riot reflects his recognition that his continued presence might create unnecessary risks for the Christian community. The couple supports this choice while also preparing for the emotional difficulty of another separation. Their friendship with Paul has deepened through shared trials, making departure difficult despite its wisdom. The couple's response to the riot demonstrates the character that has made them effective ministers throughout their voyage. They have shown courage without recklessness, wisdom without compromise, and leadership without domination. Their example supplies an example for other believers encountering similar difficulties in their own contexts. The riot marks a pivotal moment in the couple's ministry in Ephesus. While they will continue their work in the city, the events have demonstrated the precarious nature of their position. Their experience during the crisis has equipped them for whatever difficulties may lie ahead, whether in Ephesus or elsewhere. Their faith has been tested and proven strong enough to withstand even the most severe trials. House congregations and leadership. Picture a Roman residence at dusk. Oil lamps flicker in the main room as 20 believers assemble on simple stools and mats. At the center, Priscilla holds a scroll, her voice carrying the words of Jesus across the intimate space. Aquila sits nearby, ready to offer insight or clarify a passage. This scene played out thousands of times across the empire, yet few comprehended its quiet power, like this couple from Pontus and Rome. The house congregation stood as the backbone of early Christianity, more than merely a meeting location. It became a sanctuary where faith could flourish away from prying eyes. Roman authorities observed public assemblies with suspicion, yet private residences offered safety. Families opened their doors, transforming dining rooms into locations of worship and instruction. Priscilla and Aquila mastered this delicate art. Their residence in Ephesus welcomed traders, enslaved people, wealthy patrons, and common laborers. Social divisions dissolved when believers shared bread and wine together, The couple comprehended that true leadership meant creating space for others to develop. They never demanded center stage, instead fostering an environment where every voice mattered. Consider how they structured their assemblies. The evening commenced with shared meals, following Jewish tradition yet embracing Gentile customs. Dialogue flowed naturally, from daily concerns to spiritual matters. Priscilla might communicate an instruction from Paul's recent letter, while Aquila connected it to Hebrew scripture. Questions arose freely. Debates unfolded respectfully, and comprehension deepened through community dialogue. Their leadership approach reflected years of experience with diverse cultures. Having resided in Rome, Corinth, and Ephesus, they adapted their method to local customs while maintaining core Christian principles. Roman believers appreciated structured discussion, while Greek converts enjoyed philosophical investigation. The couple wove these preferences into a unified experience that honored both tradition and innovation. Women discovered particular welcome in their house congregation. Priscilla's prominent position signaled that gender need not limit spiritual participation. Female believers contributed insights, led prayers, and communicated prophetic words. This inclusive method challenged social norms, yet aligned with Jesus' treatment of women. The couple's example influenced countless other house congregations across the Mediterranean. Leadership in their hands became an act of service rather than authority. They supplied resources, guidance, and stability without demanding recognition. When traveling evangelists arrived, Priscilla and Aquila offered hospitality and platform. When conflicts emerged, they mediated with wisdom and patience. Their residence became a training ground for future leaders who carried these principles to distant cities. The physical space itself reflected their values. Simple furnishings emphasized equality over status. Scrolls lined the walls, available for study and reference. The kitchen remained open during assemblies, permitting fellowship to continue naturally. Even the arrangement of seating encouraged participation rather than passive listening. Their influence extended beyond single congregations. House congregations formed networks, sharing resources and support. Priscilla and Aquila assisted to coordinate these connections, guaranteeing that isolated believers received encouragement and struggling communities discovered assistance. They became nodes in an expanding web of Christian fellowship that spanned continents. Resistance only strengthened their determination. When authorities questioned their endeavors, the couple responded with wisdom and diplomacy. They comprehended that confrontation served no intention, while quiet persistence could accomplish much. Their steady presence supplied stability during uncertain times, reassuring believers that faith could survive any storm. The legacy of their leadership model shaped Christianity for centuries. House congregations became the norm rather than the exception, creating intimate communities where faith could mature. The principles Priscilla and Aquila demonstrated hospitality, inclusion, service, and wisdom became hallmarks of Christian leadership. Their quiet revolution transformed how believers assembled, absorbed instruction, and developed together. Women in the early congregation. In a world where women rarely spoke in public, Priscilla's voice resonated with authority and grace. She instructed grown men, corrected learned speakers, and guided expanding congregations. Her example illuminated possibilities that society tried to conceal, showing that God's talents flow regardless of gender. The Roman Empire held clear expectations for women. They managed households, raised children, and remained silent in public discourse. Religious participation meant offering prayers and sacrifices, yet never instructing or leading. Jewish customs similarly restricted women's positions, though some exceptions existed for prophetesses and wise women. Christianity brought unprecedented transformation. Jesus had welcomed women as disciples, instructors, and witnesses. He entrusted them with essential messages and honored their faith publicly. The early congregation inherited this revolutionary method, though implementing it required courage and wisdom. Priscilla embodied this transformation. Her educational background, possibly from a noble Roman family, supplied implements that she employed for kingdom intentions. She studied scripture with the same intensity as male scholars, grasping nuances that escaped others. Her mind, sharp and curious, absorbed theological ideas and practical applications with equal ability. Laboring alongside Aquila, she demonstrated collaboration in ministry. They functioned as a team, each contributing distinctive strengths. When Apollos arrived in Ephesus, both spouses acknowledged his potential and limitations. Still, the text specifically mentions Priscilla first, suggesting her primary position in his instruction. This detail discloses the regard she commanded among early believers. Her instructional approach reflected both feminine wisdom and scholarly precision. She approached correction with gentleness, avoiding public embarrassment while guaranteeing accuracy. With Apollos, she and Aquila invited him aside privately, communicating their knowledge in a way that honored his dignity. This method became an example for constructive feedback within Christian communities. The house congregation environment supplied ideal conditions for women's participation. Unlike public synagogues or temples, residences offered informal atmospheres where natural dialogue could flourish. Priscilla employed this setting to mentor other women, assisting them to uncover their own talents and summons. Her example inspired countless others to step beyond traditional boundaries. Resistance came from multiple sources. Jewish Christians struggled to accept women in instructional positions, while Gentile converts brought their own cultural biases. Some questioned whether women could manage theological complexities or supply spiritual guidance. Priscilla's consistent wisdom and evident spiritual maturity gradually overcame these objections. Her influence extended through the women she mentored. Like ripples in a pond, her impact spread from Ephesus to distant cities. Women who absorbed instruction from her carried similar methods to their own communities. They opened their residences, instructed their families, and supported traveling missionaries. The congregation expanded stronger through their faithful service. The apostolic letters reflect this reality. Paul greets numerous women by name, acknowledging their contributions to congregation existence. He mentions deaconesses, prophetesses, and co-workers who labored alongside him. Priscilla appears prominently in these lists, frequently ahead of her husband, indicating her recognized authority. Her example challenged cultural norms without destroying social fabric. She maintained regard for marriage and family while pursuing ministry summons. Her collaboration with Aquila showed that gender equality need not threaten marital harmony. Rather, mutual regard and shared intention strengthened their bond and effectiveness. Later congregation history struggled with this legacy. As Christianity became more institutionalized, women's positions gradually diminished. Official positions closed to them, and public instruction became restricted. Still, Priscilla's example remained, inspiring successive generations of women to pursue their summons despite obstacles. Her account reminds us that God's talents transcend human categories. The Spirit empowers whom He selects, regardless of gender, background, or social status. Priscilla received these talents and employed them faithfully, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire believers today. Her existence demonstrates that when barriers fall, the congregation flourishes and God's kingdom advances. Departing Ephesus. The ship's ropes creaked against the dock as Priscilla and Aquila made their final preparations. After years of fruitful ministry in Ephesus, circumstances now summoned them elsewhere. The choice hadn't arrived easily, yet wisdom occasionally requires difficult decisions. Several factors influenced their departure. The riots, stirred by Demetrius and his fellow silversmiths, had created ongoing tension. While the immediate danger passed, underlying hostility remained. Christian presence threatened profitable enterprises, and economic pressure frequently proved more persistent than religious resistance. Paul's departure had shifted the dynamic. His confrontational approach had attracted fierce resistance, yet his absence didn't eliminate the controversy. Local authorities observed Christian endeavors more closely, making ministry increasingly difficult. The couple acknowledged that their effectiveness might be compromised by continued association with recent troubles. Personal considerations also played a position. Years of constant movement and ministry labor had taken their toll. Now the couple required rest and renewal time to process their encounters and prepare for future service. Occasionally stepping back permits greater forward movement. Later, information from Rome brought additional motivation. Emperor Claudius had died in 54 AD, and his edict expelling Jews from the capital had lost its force. Fresh opportunities emerged for Jewish Christians to return and rebuild their communities. The couple's experience and reputation made them valuable assets for this challenging work. Their departure created a substantial gap in Ephesian congregation existence. The house congregation they had nurtured required fresh leadership, and the broader Christian community would miss their steady presence. However, they had instructed others well, and local believers were ready to assume greater responsibility. The couple's final weeks in Ephesus involved careful preparation. They arranged for their enterprise to continue under trusted collaborators, guaranteeing that economic relationships remained stable. Christian workers received final instructions and encouragement. Personal possessions were sorted, with unnecessary items given to those in need. Emotional farewells characterized their last assemblies. Believers who had discovered faith in their residence wept at their departure. Young leaders they had mentored expressed gratitude for years of patient instruction. The couple's humility made these instances particularly poignant as they deflected praise while expressing confidence in those they left behind. Their voyage commenced with a familiar route across the Aegean Sea. The Mediterranean could be treacherous, yet spring climate offered relatively safe passage. They traveled light, carrying essential belongings and treasured scrolls. Each mile brought them closer to their homeland and further from the community they had served so faithfully. The ship's passengers included traders, administrators, and other travelers with various destinations. Priscilla and Aquila employed these encounters as ministry opportunities, communicating their faith naturally through dialogue and example. Even in departure, they continued the work that had characterized their existences. Memories accompanied them across the water. They recalled their first arrival in Ephesus, the difficulties of establishing their enterprise, the expansion of their house congregation, and the joy of mentoring Apollos. These encounters had shaped them profoundly, preparing them for whatever awaited ahead. As the ship approached its destination, anticipation mingled with uncertainty. Rome would offer fresh opportunities, yet also new difficulties. The couple's reputation had preceded them, and believers eagerly anticipated their return. Still, the city had transformed during their absence, and they would need to adapt their method accordingly. Their departure from Ephesus marked the conclusion of a substantial chapter in early congregation history. The principles they had established would continue to guide believers long after their physical presence ended. Their influence had become woven into the fabric of Christian existence, a testament to faithful service and wise leadership. The couple's willingness to abandon successful ministry demonstrated their dedication to God's larger intentions. They comprehended that effectiveness occasionally requires mobility and that personal attachment must never override divine summons. Their example inspired others to hold ministry opportunities lightly while pursuing them wholeheartedly. Back in Rome, the eternal city sprawled before them, its 7 hills crowned with temples and palaces. Rome had transformed since their forced departure years earlier, yet its essential character remained. Power still flowed from marble corridors, traders still crowded the forums, and ordinary individuals still struggled to survive in the empire's heart. Priscilla and Aquila returned to familiar yet different circumstances. The Jewish quarter showed signs of gradual rebuilding as exiles trickled back following Claudius's death. Some had prospered in distant cities and returned with fresh resources and connections. Others arrived home, broken and bitter, struggling to rebuild shattered existences. The Christian community they encountered bore little resemblance to what they had left. Small groups had survived the expulsion, meeting quietly in residences and workshops. Gentile converts had maintained some assemblies, though without experienced Jewish Christian leadership, theological confusion had crept in. The couple's return brought hope for renewal and expansion. Their reputation preceded them. Accounts of their work in Corinth and Ephesus had reached Rome through traveling traders and visiting believers. The couple's successful mentoring of Apollos had become particularly well known, encouraging those who struggled with instructional responsibilities. Their practical wisdom and gentle method offered precisely what the fragmented community required. Re-establishing their tent-making enterprise demanded careful planning. Previous clientele had discovered fresh suppliers, and competitive relationships had shifted. However, their reputation for quality work and equitable dealings assisted them to regain market position. The workshop soon became an assembly place for believers who appreciated the couple's combination of commercial ability and spiritual wisdom. Their residence once again transformed into a house congregation. The familiar pattern resumed as believers assembled for fellowship, instruction, and prayer. Priscilla's instructional talents discovered ready application as she assisted to clarify doctrinal questions that had accumulated during their absence. Aquila's knowledge of Hebrew scripture supplied essential foundation for Gentile believers. The Roman congregation's diversity created distinctive difficulties. Social stratification ran deeper here than in other cities, with senators and enslaved people rarely mixing. The couple's experience with various cultures assisted them to navigate these tensions, creating an inclusive environment where different backgrounds could unite in common faith. Paul's letter to the Romans, written during their absence, had circulated among believers and supplied theological foundation for their work. The couple studied its contents carefully, employing Paul's arguments to address local concerns and disputes. Their personal relationship with the apostle added authority to their interpretation and application. Resistance came from expected sources. Jewish authorities who had remained in Rome perceived returning exiles with suspicion, particularly those who had embraced Christian faith. Roman administrators kept careful observation on rebuilt communities, wary of potential political implications. The couple's quiet method assisted to minimize these tensions while maintaining faithful witness. Their residence became a center for visiting missionaries and traveling believers. The couple's hospitality was legendary, and their Roman location made them natural hosts for those passing through the empire's capital. Each visitor brought information from distant congregations and carried accounts of Roman believers to far-flung communities. The work proved both familiar and challenging. Abilities cultivated in Corinth and Ephesus served them well, yet Rome's complexity demanded fresh methods. The couple adapted their approaches while maintaining core principles, demonstrating the flexibility that had characterized their entire ministry. Personal relationships deepened during this period. The couple's marriage had been tested by years of movement and ministry pressure, yet their collaboration had expanded stronger. They had absorbed how to equilibrate individual talents with unified intention, establishing an example that inspired other couples in ministry. Their influence extended beyond their immediate house congregation. Other groups pursued their counsel on practical matters and theological questions. The couple's reputation for wisdom and fairness made them natural mediators when conflicts emerged. Their presence brought stability to a community that had experienced substantial upheaval. The Roman period would prove to be their most challenging, yet most fruitful. The empire's center offered unprecedented opportunities for gospel influence, yet also exposed them to its greatest dangers. The couple's faithful service during this time would soon be tested by forces beyond their control. Persecutions in Rome. Darkness assembled over the Christian community like storm clouds on a summer evening. Emperor Nero's reign had commenced with promise, yet power's corruption gradually twisted his character. The year 64 AD brought tragedy that would transform everything. The Great Fire consumed much of Rome for 6 days and nights. Flames devoured the wooden structures of the impoverished, while sparing the marble palaces of the affluent. Homeless citizens wandered the streets, their possessions reduced to ash. Popular anger demanded someone to blame, and Nero discovered a convenient target: Christians had already attracted suspicion through their exclusive claims and refusal to participate in traditional religious ceremonies. Their rapid expansion alarmed authorities who feared any movement that might challenge imperial authority. The fire supplied perfect opportunity to channel public frustration toward this small yet visible minority. Priscilla and Aquila observed these developments with expanding concern. Their house congregation had flourished during the early years of Nero's reign, yet the transformed atmosphere made them cautious. Believers who had once met openly now assembled in smaller groups, varying their locations and timing to avoid detection. The couple's experience with resistance in other cities had equipped them for this instant. They had absorbed how to acknowledge warning signs and adapt their strategies accordingly. Their workshop continued normal operations, while their residence meetings became more discreet. Safety demanded wisdom, not merely courage. Initial arrests targeted the most visible Christian leaders. Those who had spoken publicly or attracted attention through their endeavors encountered immediate danger. The couple's quiet method had kept them relatively safe, yet they comprehended that systematic persecution would ultimately reach everyone. Their response reflected years of faithful service and mature faith. Fear was natural, yet panic would serve no intention. Rather, they concentrated on practical measures to protect their community while maintaining essential assemblies. The house congregation continued, though in modified form. Communication networks became essential. The couple assisted to establish systems for communicating information about arrests, safe meeting locations, and available resources. Their workshop served as a discreet message center where believers could receive updates and coordinate mutual aid. The persecution's intensity varied, creating periods of relative calm, followed by renewed crackdowns. During quieter times, the couple labored to strengthen their community through instruction and encouragement. They knew that survival demanded not merely physical safety, but spiritual resilience. Their relationship with Paul became more precious during these dark days. The apostles' letters supplied comfort and guidance, reminding believers that suffering was expected and that God's intentions would ultimately prevail. The couple communicated these messages carefully, knowing that hope was essential for endurance. The economic impact added another layer of difficulty. Christian enterprises encountered boycotts and harassment. The couple's tent-making operations survived because of their established reputation and essential services, yet they assisted to support believers who lost their livelihoods due to their faith. Women encountered particular vulnerabilities during persecution. Priscilla's prominent position in Christian leadership made her a potential target, yet her Roman background and social connections supplied some protection. She employed these advantages to assist other women to navigate the dangerous landscape. The couple's residence remained a refuge for those in need. They supplied temporary shelter for believers fleeing arrest, assisted families whose breadwinners had been imprisoned, and offered emotional support to those struggling with fear and uncertainty. Their hospitality became a lifeline for many. Theological questions emerged as believers struggled to comprehend their suffering. Some wondered whether they had done something wrong to deserve persecution. Others questioned whether God had abandoned them. The couple's instruction emphasized that hardship was part of following Christ, not evidence of divine displeasure. Their own faith was tested during these trials. Observing companions suffer and die challenged their comprehension of God's goodness and power. Still, their years of ministry had constructed strong spiritual foundations that withstood these storms. They clung to the promises they had instructed others, discovering strength in community worship and prayer. The persecution's aftermath would shape Christianity for generations. Those who survived carried profound appreciation for religious freedom and comprehension of faith's cost. The couple's example during these dark times inspired others to remain faithful despite overwhelming pressure. Paul's imprisonment and letters. The chains that bound Paul in his Roman prison cell could not contain his burning passion for the gospel. Information about his arrest had spread quickly through the Christian community, bringing both sorrow and determination. Priscilla and Aquila sensed the gravity of their companion's suffering while acknowledging fresh responsibilities that his imprisonment created. Paul's house arrest permitted visitors and continued correspondence, though under careful Roman supervision. The couple made regular visits, bringing information from the broader Christian community and receiving instructions for their ongoing work. These meetings, though brief and monitored, supplied essential connection during a difficult period. The apostle's letters during this time reflected his mature faith and pastoral heart. His correspondence with various congregations addressed practical concerns while maintaining theological depth. Priscilla and Aquila served as couriers and interpreters, assisting to guarantee that these precious messages reached their intended recipients. The letter to the Ephesians particularly moved the couple. Paul's words about unity, spiritual warfare, and marriage relationships resonated with their own encounters. They had lived these truths in their ministry and could testify to their practical power. The letter's circulation brought encouragement to believers encountering similar difficulties. Paul's greeting to them in his letter to the Romans held special significance. The simple words, "Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus," carried the gravity of shared ministry and mutual regard. Their names appeared in the permanent record of Christian history, though they had never pursued such recognition. The couple's position expanded as Paul's mobility decreased. They became his representatives in matters requiring personal attention, carrying his authority while maintaining their own distinctive method. This responsibility demanded wisdom and humility as they equilibrated Paul's specific instructions with local circumstances. Their house congregation assumed fresh importance during Paul's imprisonment. With the apostles' public ministry curtailed, local assemblies became primary venues for Christian instruction and encouragement. The couple's experience and reputation made their residence a natural center for this increased endeavor. Paul's letters disclosed his profound concern for the congregations he had planted. Through Priscilla and Aquila, he maintained contact with distant communities and addressed specific problems. The couple's knowledge of various congregations assisted them to supply context for Paul's responses and adapt his messages for local situations. The theological content of Paul's prison letters influenced the couple's own instruction. His emphasis on Christ's supremacy, the congregation's unity, and practical Christian living supplied framework for their teaching. They had witnessed Paul develop these themes through years of ministry and could clarify their biblical foundations. Personal instances during their visits disclosed Paul's humanity alongside his apostolic authority. He asked about specific believers, communicated memories of their common encounters, and expressed gratitude for their continued friendship. These glimpses of his heart strengthened their own faith and determination. The couple's correspondence with other congregations increased during this period. They assisted to coordinate support for Paul's requirements while maintaining communication networks that connected scattered Christian communities. Their letters, though not preserved like Paul's, carried equal importance for their recipients. Paul's approaching trial created uncertainty about the future. The couple prepared for various possibilities while maintaining hope for his release. They comprehended that God's intentions would prevail, regardless of human circumstances, though they naturally desired their companion's freedom. The impact of Paul's imprisonment extended beyond his personal situation. Other believers witnessed that following Christ might require ultimate sacrifice, yet also that God's work continued despite human limitations. The couple's faithful service during this time demonstrated that the gospel's advance didn't depend on any single individual. Their own ministry evolved during these months. Without Paul's direct presence, they assumed greater initiative in instruction and decision-making. The foundations he had established supported their independent work, though they remained dedicated to the principles he had instructed them. The letters Paul wrote from prison would ultimately become part of Christian scripture, yet their immediate impact was equally substantial. Through Priscilla and Aquila's faithful service, these messages reached their intended audiences and supplied guidance for congregations encountering various difficulties. Legacy after Paul. The information reached them quietly, carried by a travel-worn messenger from the capital. Paul had been executed, his earthly ministry complete. Priscilla and Aquila received this report with the grief of close companions and the soberness of fellow servants who comprehended that their own responsibilities had suddenly expanded. The apostle's death marked the conclusion of an era. His dynamic presence had shaped early Christianity's development. His theological insights had supplied doctrinal foundation, and his missionary voyages had established congregations across the Mediterranean. Those who had labored closely with him now encountered the difficulty of continuing his legacy. For the couple, Paul's departure signified more than personal loss. He had been their mentor, companion, and collaborator in ministry. His instruction had shaped their comprehension of the gospel. His example had guided their service, and his letters had supplied ongoing instruction. Now, they must apply these lessons without his direct guidance. The Christian community looked to surviving leaders for direction and stability. Priscilla and Aquila discovered themselves among those expected to supply continuity with apostolic instruction. Their years of faithful service and proven wisdom made them natural candidates for expanded leadership positions. Their house congregation assumed fresh significance as a center for preserving and transmitting Paul's teachings. The couple had witnessed his theological development firsthand and could clarify the context behind his written words. Their testimony became invaluable for believers who had never encountered the apostle personally. The couple's method to this expanded responsibility reflected their characteristic humility. They never claimed apostolic authority or demanded special recognition. Rather, they concentrated on faithful service and practical guidance, permitting their influence to expand naturally through demonstrated wisdom and consistent character. Their marriage continued to model Christian collaboration in ministry. The equilibrium they had accomplished between individual talents and unified intention supplied an example for other couples entering Christian service. Their relationship demonstrated that gender equality need not threaten marital harmony. The theological questions that emerged after Paul's death demanded careful management. Some believers pursued to modify his teachings to make them more acceptable to Roman society. Others pushed his ideas to extreme conclusions that distorted their original meaning. The couple's equilibrated method assisted to maintain doctrinal integrity while permitting contextual application. Their enterprise continued to supply both income and ministry opportunities. The tent-making profession brought them into contact with travelers who carried information between distant congregations. These connections assisted to maintain communication networks that had become essential for Christian survival and expansion. The couple's influence extended through the leaders they had instructed. Like Paul before them, they comprehended that effective ministry demanded multiplication rather than merely addition. The principles they had modeled spread through successive generations of Christian workers who carried their example to fresh locations. Their residence remained a center for Christian hospitality. Traveling believers discovered welcome there, persecuted Christians received refuge, and young leaders gained instruction. The couple's reputation for wisdom and kindness made them natural counselors for those encountering difficult choices. The written records of their ministry, while limited, preserved their essential contributions. Paul's letters mentioned them with regard and gratitude, guaranteeing that their names would be remembered alongside other early Christian leaders. However, their true legacy lay in the countless existences they had touched, rather than in written recognition. Their adaptation to transforming circumstances demonstrated flexibility within faithfulness. As Christianity evolved from a small Jewish sect to a diverse movement spanning the Roman Empire, the couple adjusted their approaches while maintaining core principles. This equilibrium became essential for the congregation's survival and expansion. The couple's quiet persistence through various difficulties supplied an example for Christian endurance. They had encountered expulsion from Rome, resistance in Corinth, riots in Ephesus, and persecution under Nero. Each trial had strengthened their faith and refined their ministry method. Their account reminds us that Christian history includes many unsung heroes whose faithful service made lasting impact. While apostles like Paul received primary recognition, couples like Priscilla and Aquila supplied the stable foundation that enabled dramatic expansion and development. Theological impact. The scrolls spread across their surface contained letters from congregations throughout the known world. Each bore testimony to how the gospel had taken root in different cultures and contexts. Priscilla and Aquila studied these reports with wonder, acknowledging patterns that connected back to their own ministry encounters. Their theological influence flowed through the existences they had touched, rather than through written treatises. Unlike Paul, who documented his teachings in letters that survived centuries, the couple's impact arrived through personal mentoring and practical demonstration. Their method emphasized living theology, rather than abstract ideas. The most obvious example was Apollos, whose transformation under their guidance had rippled across the ancient world. His powerful preaching in Corinth had constructed upon the foundation they had supplied, demonstrating how careful instruction could multiply exponentially. The congregations he established carried principles that reflected their patient instruction. Their comprehension of Christian unity proved particularly substantial. Having resided in multiple cities and labored with diverse populations, they grasped the gospel's universal appeal while respecting cultural differences. This perspective assisted to bridge the gap between Jewish and Gentile believers that threatened to divide the early congregation. The couple's method to gender positions within Christian ministry challenged contemporary assumptions while maintaining biblical foundations. Priscilla's instructional ministry, exercised in collaboration with her husband, supplied an example that honored both spiritual giftedness and social wisdom. Her example influenced how later generations comprehended women's positions in congregation leadership. Their emphasis on hospitality as a spiritual discipline shaped Christian practice for centuries. The couple demonstrated that opening one's residence was not merely social courtesy, but active ministry. Their house congregations became templates for Christian community that emphasized relationship over ritual. The theological approach they employed emphasized practical application over theoretical speculation. They comprehended that doctrine must connect to daily existence to have lasting impact. This method influenced how Christian instruction developed, emphasizing life transformation rather than intellectual exercise. Their work with house congregations contributed to ecclesiology, the study of congregation structure and function. The couple's example demonstrated that Christian community could thrive without elaborate structures or intricate hierarchy. Their method emphasized every believer's participation rather than passive consumption of religious services. The couple's patient correction of Apollos established principles for theological education that emphasized humility and accuracy. They showed that even gifted instructors required ongoing instruction and that correction could be offered without causing offense. Their approach became an example for constructive theological dialogue. Their dedication to biblical accuracy influenced how early Christians approached scripture interpretation. The couple's careful study of Hebrew texts and apostolic letters supplied foundation for systematic theology. Their example encouraged believers to examine teachings against biblical standards rather than accepting them uncritically. The relationship between faith and labor discovered expression in their tent-making enterprise. The couple demonstrated that secular employment could serve spiritual intentions, supplying platforms for ministry and resources for service. Their example assisted to establish a theology of labor that honored both spiritual summons and practical necessity. Their comprehension of spiritual warfare, absorbed through years of resistance and persecution, contributed to Christian thinking about evil's reality and God's ultimate victory. They had encountered hostile forces in multiple contexts and absorbed how to respond with wisdom rather than mere courage. The couple's method to mentoring influenced how Christian leadership developed. They comprehended that influence demanded relationship, that instruction demanded patience, and that effectiveness demanded character. Their approach emphasized modeling over instruction, demonstration over clarification. Their theological legacy lived on through the institutional practices they assisted to establish. House congregations, hospitality ministries, lay leadership, and gender-inclusive participation all reflected principles they had demonstrated. These practices shaped Christianity's development long after their deaths. The couple's emphasis on theological equilibrium prevented extremism while maintaining biblical fidelity. They avoided both legalistic rigidity and libertine excess, demonstrating that Christian freedom demanded both grace and wisdom. Their example assisted to establish theological boundaries that protected essential truth while permitting cultural adaptation. Their influence on Christian education extended beyond structured instruction to include practical discipleship. They comprehended that spiritual formation demanded both intellectual comprehension and character development. Their method emphasized whole life transformation rather than mere knowledge acquisition. Historical and cultural legacy. The morning illumination filtered through the windows of the British Museum as scholars carefully examined fragments of papyrus from ancient Corinth. Among the routine commercial documents, they uncovered a receipt bearing a familiar name, Aquila, tentmaker. The discovery sent ripples through academic circles, supplying tangible evidence of existences that had shaped history. Archaeological evidence has gradually confirmed details of Priscilla and Aquila's world. Excavations in Corinth have disclosed the type of workshops where they would have labored, while Roman sites show the housing arrangements typical of their social class. These discoveries assist modern believers to comprehend the concrete realities behind the biblical narrative. Early congregation historians acknowledged the couple's significance. Writers like Clement of Rome and Ignatius of Antioch referenced their contributions to apostolic ministry. However, later historians, influenced by transforming attitudes toward women in leadership, frequently minimized Priscilla's position while emphasizing Aquila's contributions. The couple's influence on Christian art emerged gradually. Byzantine mosaics depicted them alongside Paul, usually in scenes of instruction or hospitality. Medieval manuscripts illustrated their instruction of Apollos, though artistic conventions frequently portrayed Priscilla in subordinate positions that contradicted biblical descriptions. Renaissance scholars rediscovered their account with fresh appreciation. Humanist emphasis on individual achievement highlighted their practical contributions to Christian expansion. Protestant reformers particularly appreciated their example of lay leadership and biblical instruction outside structured ecclesiastical structures. Their legacy influenced Christian mission strategy. The couple's approach of establishing enterprises in fresh cities, constructing relationships through honest labor, and gradually communicating their faith became a template for modern missionaries. Their method demonstrated that effective evangelism demanded cultural sensitivity and practical wisdom. The Industrial Revolution brought fresh appreciation for their tent-making profession as society acknowledged the dignity of accomplished craftsmanship. The couple's combination of enterprise effectiveness and spiritual service gained renewed regard. Their example encouraged believers to perceive secular labor as potential ministry platform. Modern feminist scholarship has rediscovered Priscilla's remarkable position. Her prominence in biblical texts, her instructional ministry, and her recognition by apostolic leaders challenged traditional assumptions about women's capabilities. Her example has inspired countless women to pursue their own summons despite cultural obstacles. The couple's influence on Christian education continues today. Their approach of personal mentoring, practical application, and patient correction remains relevant for modern discipleship. Seminary programs frequently employ their method with Apollos as a case study in effective theological education. Their example of Christian marriage has influenced pastoral counseling and family ministry. The couple's collaboration in both enterprise and ministry demonstrated that shared intention strengthens rather than threatens marital bonds. Their example supplies guidance for couples pursuing to serve together while maintaining healthy relationships. Contemporary congregation planting movements frequently reference their strategy. The couple's pattern of establishing enterprises, constructing relationships, and gradually forming Christian communities appeals to modern missionaries laboring in restrictive environments. Their method supplies practical guidance for those pursuing to communicate faith in hostile contexts. Their legacy in Christian hospitality continues through modern ministries. Organizations that supply housing for missionaries, support for refugees, and welcome for international students frequently trace their inspiration to Priscilla and Aquila's example. Their example demonstrates that simple acts of kindness can have profound spiritual impact. The couple's influence on theological education extends beyond structured institutions. Their emphasis on practical application, character development, and mentoring relationships has shaped how many Christians approach spiritual formation. Their approach supplies alternatives to purely academic methods to religious instruction. Their account has inspired modern bivocational ministry. Pastors who support themselves through secular employment frequently reference their example, discovering encouragement in their combination of enterprise effectiveness and spiritual service. Their example demonstrates that ministry effectiveness doesn't demand full-time religious employment. The couple's method to cultural adaptation influences modern missiology. Their capacity to labor effectively in multiple cultural contexts while maintaining doctrinal integrity supplies guidance for cross-cultural ministry. Their example shows how Christian principles can be applied across different social environments. Their legacy in Christian unity continues to inspire ecumenical efforts. The couple's capacity to bridge differences between Jewish and Gentile believers supplies an example for overcoming contemporary divisions. Their example demonstrates that diversity can strengthen rather than weaken Christian community. Reflective conclusion. The oil lamp flickered low in the Roman residence as evening shadows lengthened across the courtyard. Somewhere in the quiet rooms, an elderly couple sat together, their weathered hands holding scrolls that told of congregations planted, believers encouraged, and existences transformed. The names Priscilla and Aquila would outlive emperors and empires, carried forward by the countless souls they had touched. Their account whispers a profound truth about influence and legacy. In an age obsessed with platform and visibility, they demonstrated that the most lasting impact frequently arrives through quiet faithfulness. They never wrote epistles that survived centuries, never performed miracles that attracted crowds, never held official titles that commanded regard. Still, their influence shaped Christianity's development in ways that reverberate still. Consider what they selected to prioritize. Rather than pursuing recognition, they opened their residence. Rather than demanding platform, they served behind the scenes. When they could have promoted themselves, they lifted others. Their tent-making enterprise supplied not merely income, but ministry opportunities. Their marriage became a collaboration that multiplied their individual talents. Their residence transformed into a sanctuary where faith could flourish. The couple's method to resistance discloses character forged in fire. Expelled from Rome, they rebuilt in Corinth. Encountering riots in Ephesus, they continued their work. During persecution, they supplied refuge for others. Each difficulty became an opportunity to demonstrate grace under pressure. Their resilience arrived not from stubbornness, but from profound roots in unchanging truth. Their approach of influence deserves particular attention. They comprehended that transformation occurs through relationship, not rhetoric. When Apollos required correction, they invited him aside privately. When believers required instruction, they welcomed them into their residence. When Paul required support, they supplied practical assistance. Their method honored human dignity while maintaining biblical truth. The couple's legacy challenges modern assumptions about effectiveness and significance. They accomplished no fame during their lifetime, accumulated no wealth, held no impressive titles. Still, 2,000 years later, their names appear in Scripture while emperors are forgotten. Their quiet service outlasted the most powerful empire in human history. Their account offers hope for ordinary believers who wonder whether their existences matter. Not everyone is summoned to be an apostle like Paul, yet everyone can practice hospitality like Priscilla and Aquila. Not everyone will plant congregations across continents, yet everyone can mentor someone who requires guidance. The couple's relationship with power discloses wisdom for every generation. They resided under Roman authority, encountered imperial edicts, and navigated political tensions. Still, they never pursued to overthrow systems or demand immediate transformation. Rather, they labored within existing structures while maintaining allegiance to a higher kingdom. Their method demonstrated that faithful presence frequently accomplishes more than loud protest. Their dedication to truth equilibrated grace with accuracy. When they encountered error, they responded with patience rather than anger. When they offered correction, they did so privately and respectfully. Their example shows that defending truth need not demand destroying relationships. Wisdom knows when to speak and when to remain silent, when to correct and when to encourage. The couple's comprehension of community shaped how believers relate to one another. They established spaces where social divisions dissolved, where enslaved people and owners shared meals, where women and men participated equally. Their residence became a preview of God's kingdom, where human worth transcended earthly categories. This vision continues to challenge congregations today. Their economic method offers guidance for modern believers. They employed their enterprise effectiveness to fund ministry rather than accumulate luxury. Their workshop welcomed believers and supplied employment opportunities. Their resources served kingdom intentions while meeting practical requirements. They demonstrated that wealth becomes blessing when it serves others. The couple's resilience through suffering supplies comfort for those encountering trials. They experienced exile, resistance, persecution, and loss. Still, these hardships refined rather than destroyed their faith. They absorbed how to discover joy in simple pleasures, strength in shared burdens, and hope in eternal promises. Their example reminds us that difficulties can become doorways to deeper faith. Their collaboration in ministry challenges traditional gender positions while honoring biblical principles. Priscilla's instructional talents flourished under Aquila's support, while his strengths complemented her capabilities. They accomplished more together than either could have accomplished alone. Their marriage became a platform for service rather than a barrier to ministry. The couple's influence on subsequent generations demonstrates how faithfulness compounds over time. The leaders they instructed established congregations that spread across the ancient world. The principles they modeled influenced Christian practice for centuries. Their quiet service created ripples that continue to expand today. Their account concludes not with dramatic finale, but with gentle fading. History loses track of their final years, their specific deaths, their burial locations. Still, this obscurity appears fitting for existences that appreciated substance over spectacle. They comprehended that true significance lies not in being remembered, but in making a difference. As we close their account, we acknowledge that it continues in every believer who selects service over self-promotion, relationship over recognition, faithfulness over fame. Priscilla and Aquila's legacy lives on in countless Christians who open their residences, mentor younger believers, and quietly advance God's kingdom through daily obedience. Their tent-making implements have long since rusted away. Their house congregations have crumbled to dust. Their voices have been silent for nearly 2 millennia. Still, their influence continues to shape existences, inspire service, and encourage faith. They accomplish the kind of immortality that matters most. Existences that continue to bear fruit long after their earthly voyage ends. In a world that celebrates the loud and visible, they whisper a different message. True greatness arrives through faithful service. Lasting influence flows from genuine love. The kingdom of God advances through ordinary individuals who make extraordinary selections. Their account reminds us that the most important work frequently occurs in quiet locations, among small groups, through simple acts of faithfulness. The oil lamp finally gutted out in that Roman residence, yet the illumination they kindled continues to burn. Their account concludes where it commenced with ordinary individuals who selected to follow Jesus, and in that selection discovered that their ordinary existences could accomplish extraordinary things. Their legacy beckons us to similar faithfulness, similar service, similar hope that our small efforts can contribute to God's great intentions. In the end, Priscilla and Aquila's account is not really about them at all. It's about the gospel they served, the Savior they followed, and the kingdom they assisted to establish. They would desire no other legacy than this, that through their existences, others might uncover the transforming power of faith, the joy of service, and the hope that arrives from knowing that every act of love, no matter how small, resonates through eternity.